What up, though? Come on, come sit down so I can tell y'all about how these ghost kids at my mama's school been helping these other kids. Nothing crazy like helping them on tests or exams or anything like that. But just come on. Come on. I was actually going to wait to give y'all this story. This happened a few weeks ago. It's like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I haven't been feeling well, so that's why it's been taking so long. So I was on lunch duty with my mom, and it was a 6 or 7 year old boy that had to use the bathroom. So my mom sent me, she's like, hey, can you go take him? So I walked him down to the bathroom. And when I walked him down to the bathroom, there was this male staff. And I said, hey, can you check to make sure that there are no kids in there before I send him in there? And the reason being is because older kids, I try to make sure that older kids are not in the same space as younger kids, because older kids can be pretty cruel. Okay, there have been some instances where older kids have taken pictures of other kids in the bathroom, on the toilet. So that's why I did that. And so I sent him in. He said, it's clear. There's nobody in there. He opened up all the stalls. Nobody in there. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So I sent the little boy in there to use the bathroom. While he's using the bathroom, I'm standing guard outside the door. And nobody entered the bathroom at all. Standing guard outside the door. After he flushes the toilet, I heard him yell out, I can't reach the sink. And so I was like, well, I can't come in there. I said, but you come on out and I can take you down here so you can wash your hands down, to this other bathroom where I know the sink is low. And he was just like, okay. But he said, okay, and never came out. But all of a sudden I hear water running. And I'm like, oh, well, looked like he was able to reach the sink after all. So then when he came out, I said, I thought you couldn't reach the sink. He said, oh, the big boy picked me up so I can wash my hands. I said, what big boy? He said, the big boy that was in the bathroom. I was like, oh, okay. So I went ahead and I told him, go ahead and go back to the lunchroom, because I wanted to see what big boy he was talking about. So this bathroom that I'm talking about is right next to the principal's office. Now, the kind of sink that's in this bathroom is one of those circular sinks where multiple people can wash their hands at a time. Y'all know those older sinks, the one that was in Harriet the Spy, that kind of sink. And so I sat right next to the bathroom waiting for this big boy to come out. Nobody ever came out and nobody went in. Okay, there was nobody that walked past me, nothing. And there's only one entryway into this bathroom. Okay. So the entire lunch hour, I'm down there next to the principal's office, outside the principal's door, just watching to see if the big boy came out of the bathroom. Nobody entered, nobody exited. And I was like, okay, I already know what's up, so I'm gonna just go ahead and go about my business. And so that's what I did. Now, on a different day, me and my mom are in her office. We're having lunch. Her door is closed, but there's a knock at the door. And I went over to open the door. So when I opened the door, there was this brown-skinned little girl. She was probably about, I would say maybe 10. And I'm just going based off of her height. And so she knocked on the door, and my mom was just like, come on in, baby. Now, mind you, we're both talking to her. Okay. Soon as she walks in, she walks up to my mom, and she told my mom that she needed to get washed up, and she needed some deodorant, and she needed new pants. Okay. My mom goes into her little closet area, and she gets the girl some pants out, I get her deodorant and soap out, a towel, and she uses my mom's bathroom that's in my mom's office, right? So the bathroom is right there. There's no way that anybody can leave from out of there without us seeing them or hearing them. So she closed the bathroom door, and I hear the water. I hear her running the water. Y'all, the water kept running. And so I'm like, Ma, I said, she been in there a long time. So I knocked on the door, and I'm like, hey, you okay in there? She's like, yeah, I'm okay. Thank you. I'm like, cool. Another 10 minutes roll around, and my mom was just like, baby, you got to hurry up and get to your next class. So go ahead and speed it up so you can get to your next class on time. Nothing. No word. She says nothing. So my mom knocked on the door. No answer. My mom kind of slowly opens the door, and she kicked the kickstand down because there's nobody in the bathroom. She said, somebody came in here, right, to clean themselves, right? I'm like, yes. And we've been here the entire time. Neither one of us have left this room. Neither one of us. We're not all up in our phones. We waited for her to come out because, like, what? That's why I don't be listening to y'all when y'all say spirits aren't real. Because somebody was in that bathroom and the water was still running. Third time around, my daughter, this is a completely different day. My daughter has music class in the same building that my mom's office is in. So she has music class there, and she also has her lunch there in that building. But she was coming from the opposite direction of her class and the lunch room. So I was confused when I saw her little jacket turn the corner. And so, of course, I ran down there. I'm like, that was my kid's jacket. So I ran down there, cut the corner, and I see her about to walk out the back doors. I said, where are you going? She was like, oh, the big kid told me that I needed to walk with her. Now, mind you, it's only about 4 or 5 students who Simone would absolutely trust to walk away with them. These are students that I trust to go and get her from her classroom. Kids that she knows. So I started naming off the names like, oh, was it? And she was like, nope, wasn't her. Wasn't him. Wasn't her or him. And I was like, so who were you walking with? She was just like, I don't know. That worried me. That worried me big time. So, of course, they would have still been standing there with her because she said that they were about to walk out the door. Nobody, like all the doors, all the surrounding doors, like in the back area ways of the school, those are locked. You can't get into those without keys, right? The front door, you have to go through those to get into the school. There's 2 security guards. The principal's always right there. You know, the AP is always right there, and they know her. They would have never let her walk through the front. And so I was just like, that's so weird to me. So I kept asking her questions. Even when we got home, she said that it was a tall white girl. Y'all, and I'm not just saying this. There is no tall white student that goes to that school. There are white students, but not no tall white girls with blonde hair. That scared the heck out of me.
Let's talk about how scary astral projection is. When you hear hi, I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and I actually have an email where anyone who anticipates can send me their ghost stories. And I'll be honest, I don't get a ton of emails about dreams, astral projection, or anything like that. But when I do, they are by far one of the scarier types of emails that I get. And this is one of them. So let's get into it. This story comes from somebody who did not specify if they wanted to be anonymous or not. So for obvious reasons, I'm going to play it safe and keep them anonymous. But the person who sent me this email says that in the beginning of March of 2023, they were staying with their sister who had just had carpal tunnel surgery and was just there to help around the house and with her sister's children. Now, the person who sent me this email specifies very clearly that she has stayed plenty of times at her sister's home. She's never had a bad experience. She has literally slept in the same place that this whole story occurs at and has never had an issue, has never felt anything evil, unsafe, scary, no paranormal experiences, like, at all. And for context purposes, this home is relatively an open concept. And from my understanding, the living room, the kitchen, and the dining room are all pretty much one room. There is a doorway that connects like the kitchen and the living room and the dining room area. From my understanding, you can see into the other rooms if you are sitting in one of the 3 rooms. For example, if you're sitting in the living room, then you can see into the kitchen and into the dining room. If you're sitting in the dining room, you can see the living room and the doorway to the kitchen. And the person who sent me this email was sleeping on the couch in the living room. Now, she also says that on this particular night, she didn't remember falling asleep, which is pretty unusual because when she woke up, she was so thirsty. And obviously, she just walks to the kitchen and tries to grab a glass of water, not thinking anything was abnormal, until she felt the weight of the glass. It was like it was almost too heavy for her to carry in her hands. She thought it was just her trying to wake up and her body's not quite being adjusted to being awake after sleeping so hard. Eventually, she's like, I'm way too tired to even try to get water, so she just gives up and walks back to the living room to try and continue to sleep. The moment she hits the doorway that connects the kitchen and the living room, she freezes. because she sees herself sleeping on the couch. And her body was surrounded by 7 cloaked figures and a woman who was nude with hair down to her waist, holding the mouth of her body open, chanting something into her mouth. And she specifically says that she did not understand it. All she knew was she wanted it to stop. How do I make it stop? The person who sent me this email could not speak. She could not move. She could not talk. And as she's having these thoughts, like, I just want this to stop, as she's having these thoughts, the old woman turns to look at her and laughs and says she hasn't told us to stop yet. So obviously after that interaction, panic begins to set in because she's never experienced anything like this. This is very unusual, especially for it being at her sister's house. And as all of these thoughts are circulating in her brain, there is a singular voice in the back of her mind that says, run. And without hesitation, she runs full speed towards her body and immediately wakes up and shoots up from the couch. She looks over at the clock and it is 3:33 a.m. The woman who sent me this email says that she then prayed for an hour or until she felt safe again, and says that that wholeheartedly changed things forever for her. And she believes that she was under attack spiritually that night. And personally, I don't know what I would do in that situation. So anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories. Let's talk about a terrifying story from India. When you hear hi, I usually talk about pretty scary stuff, and I actually have an email where anyone finds this page can send me their ghost story, and this is one of them. So let's get into it. This story comes from somebody who would like to remain anonymous, and for obvious reasons, I'm going to respect that. The person who sent me this email says that in 2018, her and her family moved into this 2-story home in India. For context purposes, the layout of this house is very interesting, the first floor being a completely separate unit with another family living in it, and upstairs is where her and her family lived. Now, to get to that unit, you had to walk up a spiral staircase that had exactly 4 turns in total. On the second turn, there was this massive window that looked out onto the street where they ended up putting their fish tank. And at the top of the spiral staircase, there was an additional staircase that led up to the actual unit. The person who sent me this email also specifies that the ground level entrance was locked at all times and only her parents had the keys. However, despite all the safety measures, her and her siblings still did not like the second turn of this staircase, the one with this massive window, to the point where they made a game out of it on who could reach the door the fastest. And the girl who sent me this email says that they, as children, never knew why they didn't like the staircase. However, all the kids agreed that they felt like there was just someone watching them all the time on the staircase. And even got to the point where some of them said that they felt a hand brushing their back. Kind of like a shiver going down your spine. And nothing had happened specifically in the house leading up to this event. It was just one of those feelings that you have as a kid where you're like, I don't like that, so I'm not gonna mess with it. So months pass. And one night, close to midnight, her and her family are watching this paranormal movie. And when the movie ended, the person who sent me this email says that she walked to the other side of the home to use the bathroom. Now, this was called the common bathroom in the email, and it has these very specific characteristics like barred windows. And from that window, you can see other houses in the neighborhood. And as she's using the bathroom, she looks up towards the ventilation system and sees this face. And the way that this face is described in the email is so horrific. She said that this thing's hair was completely matted and its eyes were bulging out of its head. Skin was like a purplish blue color, but she could see the veins underneath the skin. But as soon as she blinked, she was gone. Obviously, she picked up her towel, ran out of the bathroom, and just thought it was the repercussions of watching a horror movie in the middle of the night, so she didn't tell anybody. And within a year, her family actually moved from the house that I'm talking about to a new house. And during a family dinner, it actually got brought up on why they decided to move. And it was specifically because her parents did not like the tenants downstairs. And it was because they had a reputation for starting shit in between families. And the last people that lived in the unit that this family lived in started shit between a son and a mother so badly that the son cut contact from his mom completely and moved away with his wife. This led to the mother passing away, specifically on the staircase, exactly 2 turns up where the kids said that they felt like they were being watched. And the craziest part is that her parents, prior to moving into that 2-story home, knew that this woman had passed away in the home, which is why they decided to put the fish tank in the staircase area to kind of drown out the sadness of that area. Another interesting thing that happened after this woman's death was all the neighborhood women gathered in the common bathroom area to gossip about it, which is exactly where the girl who sent me this email saw that face. And by the end of this conversation, her parents actually confessed that the first time they visited the house, they were also very uncomfortable near the staircase. I think the end of this email is extremely interesting and also very haunting, because the person who sent me this email says that places do not forget what happened there. That staircase remembered what had happened to that woman, how she passed away, and was watching the children who moved in after the death of this woman the same way it was watching her before she passed away. The grills on the common bathroom window also saw this woman's life fall apart after her son cut contact with her. And the girl who sent me this email says that she thinks that is why that woman showed herself and why the house allowed that woman to show herself, if that makes sense. And I don't have much to say about this story other than it scares me, but it's also extremely sad. And I don't think it's a topic talked about enough of how places really don't forget things that happen and how the energy is kind of seeped into the fibers of that area. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
I saw a baby crawling into my bedroom, only I did not have a baby. A woman named Josephine sent me this story, and she said that when she was about 21 years old, she got married, and a little bit after that, she got pregnant. It was her very first pregnancy. She was excited, but she was nervous. And she says that as soon as she got pregnant, she started having really bizarre dreams. And one specific day, she was taking a nap, and she's facing the wall towards the bedroom door, and she sees the door kind of creak open. She thinks she's asleep, so she's laying there, and in her sleep she has her eyes open and she sees a baby kind of like sitting down at the door, not coming in, not moving, but the face was grim. The baby had like sharp looking teeth. It did not look like anything good. She woke up, nothing ever happened. 2, 3, 4, 5 days passed, and she had another dream. Same thing, except the baby was now crawling a little towards her. She manages to wake herself up. A week later, another dream, and every time that she would have dreams, it seems like this baby was starting to get closer and closer to her. And she says that she was freaking out every time because although this was a baby, it did not look normal. It looked kind of evil. So again, every time that she was having this dream, this baby was kind of crawling closer and closer to her. She would wake herself up until one day she had a dream, same thing, except the baby was crawling onto the bed. Hell no. Then one day the baby is sitting on top of her, like on top of her stomach. And of course, motherly instinct, you try to protect your baby, but it was kind of like a sleep paralysis type thing. She couldn't move. And she says that as soon as this evil looking thing sits on her stomach, she feels a very sharp pain in real life. That next day, unfortunately, she miscarries. And she says that what's scary is that after that happened, she never had a dream like this ever again. She never dreamt of this baby. She never saw anything similar to this ever again. And she doesn't know what to think of it, because it didn't start to happen until she got pregnant. But then it didn't stop until that tragedy happened. Again, this happened when Josephine was 21 and she is now 56 years old. She has lived her life. She has had other children. She's a grandma, and she says that she still thinks about this all the time. She just doesn't know what to think of it because it's just so bizarre. And she just doesn't know if it's a coincidence. What do you guys think? This is bizarre. I've never heard of a story that is anywhere similar to this. What do you guys think? Thank you so much to Josephine for sending me this story and for being so vulnerable enough to share it with us. And if you guys have any spooky stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email because I'd love to read them. And I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye! If it wasn't my mom that called me, then who was it? Spooky story time. A follower named Amy says that a few summers ago she was driving home to El Paso from Colorado, and she says that it was her and her sister and a few other passengers. They were driving along and it was about 10 p.m. They were listening to music, and out of nowhere, she receives a phone call from her mom. So she was listening to music on Apple CarPlay. The music suddenly stops. She looks at the screen, and it's her mom. She proceeds to answer the phone call, but she hears her mom kind of far away. It's not connected to the speaker. For some reason, the call is not connected to the speaker, and it's still on the phone. And she can hear her mom saying, hello, hey, hello. So Amy is trying to drive and pick up the phone and say, hey, hold on, I can't hear you. Let me connect you to the radio. And for some reason, she was not able to connect the call at all, either to the phone, like put it on speaker, or connect it to the actual car. So out of nowhere, the phone call just hangs up. Amy says that she ended up calling her mom back, and she's like, hey mom, what happened? And her mom is like, what do you mean what happened? What's going on? Are you okay? Amy's like, yeah, you just called me. You didn't answer. I was trying to connect the phone, but for some reason it wasn't working. What happened? We are on our way. I'm driving. And her mom is like, honey, it's 10 o'clock. I'm asleep. I didn't call you. So Amy and her sister are the only ones awake in the car. Amy's driving and her sister's on the passenger side. And her sister looks at Amy and she's clearly like, honey, I heard mom on the phone. Like, what do you mean? So Amy's sister grabs the phone, goes to the call log, and there is no missed call from mom. Amy tells mom to check her call log, and there is no outgoing call to Amy either. Is this a glitch in the Matrix? What do you guys think? It's definitely bizarre because her mom's contact came up on the radio. Like, she can see it on there. She answered it, but the call did not connect to the radio. She can hear her mom's voice on her phone. She's trying to put her phone on speaker because she's driving. Call just hangs up, and now mom says there's no record of nothing. They check both call logs, nothing. That is weird. Thank you so much to Amy for sending me this spooky story. As always, if you guys have any stories you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email because I'd love to read them, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
You guys want to hear a story about a haunted house that terrified me to my core? Since Cynthia was little, she's been able to see things, and her family thinks that she's crazy for it, but she's not. First incident occurred when she was around 5 to 7 years old. At the time, she was living with her grandparents, her mother, and her uncles. She remembers walking to the main floor bathroom and then opening the sliding door to go to the toilet, and she sees something that absolutely terrified her. She sees this misty black figure floating above the paper towel roll. She said at this point she screamed as loud as she possibly could, and her whole entire family ran to check on her, but nothing was there when they came into the bathroom. Little did she know that this would be nothing compared to what she would experience next. She actually said that over the years, this would be the least frightening situation that she had ever been in to date. And it also started happening a lot. She was seeing this misty figure everywhere. Fast forward to 2023, and she's gone through a long stint of time where she has not experienced anything. So she actually forgot about a lot of it. So she's in her living room, sitting on the couch, closest to the stairs, and she's just scrolling through her phone. When suddenly something catches her eye. So she looks up and she sees something that to this day still gives her nightmares. She sees this woman standing in the corner of her living room, extremely tall and extremely thin. She has dirty, long black hair and a dirty white dress on. She said she was so thin and tall, it was terrifying. She says at this point she is frozen in fear. She cannot move. She has never felt fear like that before. And then the woman starts awkwardly walking across the room and behind the couch. So imagine a very tall, thin lady just walking like this behind your couch, behind you. Now, she did not know what to do at this point. She is so terrified. She said as soon as it walked behind the couch, it just disappeared, vanished. So she hops up off that couch and she runs to her mom's room. She said that when she got into her mom's room, she didn't try to wake her up. She just crawled into bed with her and she was just trying to forget what she had just seen. But the next part is kind of concerning. Next morning, she wakes up and she goes downstairs to get a drink of water. When she gets to the very last step, she said suddenly she just got this huge, painful headache. She started to feel fear like she had never felt before, and she was uncomfortable and she was in pain. But at this point, she decides that she's going to go back to her mom's room and she's going to lay down. And she lays down for a little bit longer. She eventually gets back up and she goes down to walk down the stairs. But this time, she's fine. The only thing is that for 4 days after this happened, she could not walk up her stairs without all of those feelings flooding back to the surface. The pain, the discomfort, the intense fear. She said that she knows that people may chalk this up to being a normal reaction connection to being in a place that caused you fear, but she knows it wasn't that. She says she has seen things, heard things, and felt things before, and this phenomenon has never occurred. She said she doesn't know if this is a gift or a special connection to the other side, and she doesn't know what is wrong with her. But none of her family or friends ever see or hear anything that she hears, and it scares her. So what do you guys think of this story? First of all, I would not be able to handle that. Seeing something tall and that thin, like that tall and that thin, especially a woman, something about a woman is so scary to me. Just terrify me. I just can't with it. It's just, oh my God. I had an experience once that was similar to that. It was a sleep paralysis incident, and I will never forget it.
Imagine someone curses your dad, but because he's so powerful, the spell misses him and comes to you. I am back with another spooky story, and this one is yet another submission from Limpopo. We're gonna call the person who submitted the story Tessa. Tessa says this is a spooky story that happened from her family in 1999. She wasn't born yet, but she was told everything. So her grandfather had 2 wives. We're gonna call the first wife, who is the grandmother, Mary. Mary, the grandmother, had 7 children. It is said that the second wife tried to unalive the grandfather. However, somehow the grandfather dodged it. And because a curse of death had been laid, according to their tradition, it had to go somewhere. So it went to the first wife's children. So Mary, Tessa's grandmother's kids. Now this is how things start. Their 6th child was not born with epilepsy. Somehow that year, it started. They were in Gauteng around winter. It was a Sunday, and Mary was outside unhanging clothes that she had hung earlier that day. Tessa's aunt went outside to help her, and they were just talking. Suddenly, Mary notices that her daughter was no longer responding to the conversation. She moved closer to see what was going on and check. When she looked around, well, she found her daughter inside a big tin. So, side note, they used to put fire inside of the bin for warmth during the winter. Well, Tessa's aunt had fainted with only her head inside of that bin. Her entire body was burnt. The grandmother, her mother, rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately on Tuesday morning, she passed away. So at this point, the family comes back to Gianni for funeral preparations. On the following Sunday, they had to return to Gauteng. On the same day that they arrived, the 4th child started complaining of a headache. He was very prayerful, and he was convinced that he would not survive this if they didn't take him to a church. But the grandfather refused to take him to church, but instead take him to the hospital. He also died on a Tuesday. So at this point, they go back to Limpopo to bury him, and that's already 2 people in 2 weeks. When they went back again, because all of her children were schooling in Gauteng, her last born male child suddenly couldn't blink or move. And the grandfather once again suggested taking him to the hospital. Tessa's grandmother immediately said no. He said, I'm still mourning my 2 children. I'm not risking another one. They were members of one of the biggest churches in South Africa, so they immediately rushed to one. As she entered the church, prophets came running to her saying, this situation is not in our hands to solve. Please go to this place. They gave her directions to a spiritual helper. They took no time and went. When they arrived at that place, the spiritual helper asked, why did you bring an unalive person here? In reference to the last born male. So grandmother is just bawling her eyes out. She doesn't answer. The spiritual helper starts chanting in a language that I guess only the mother could decode. The spiritual helper told the grandmother, you just buried 2 of your children, and this was supposed to be the 3rd this week. The list goes on. Your children are meant to die one by one, week after week. Well, they go through with the ritual. The spiritual helper broke the curse of death and brought the uncle back to life. He went home fine, but then later confessed that he had been with their late aunt and uncle in a very dark place. The spiritual helper also told the grandma and grandpa that if they had not buried the first 2 children, that she would have been able to bring them back to life as well, because they were not truly unalived. Unfortunately, they had already been buried, so they were turned into zombies and sold to another person. Spiritual helper goes on to say that the second wife did this, but it was never meant for the children, but it was meant for the grandfather. However, he was so strong that the curse went to the first wife's children. Mind you, the second wife still haunts the grandmother and her children. Even Tessa and them, the grandchildren, till this day, says that nothing goes well for them. And when they go to prophets, they keep saying it's the second wife. She is still after their lives and destiny. Wow, South Africa. Thank you guys so much for listening to this spooky story. If you have a spooky story that you want me to tell, feel free to submit it to me right here on TikTok. Please don't email me. I beg, do not email me. Send it to me right here on TikTok or Instagram. Make sure you check out my YouTube channel, which is Rebecca Journey, for longer, better, and spookier stories. I've dropped videos on there that you guys have not seen. Make sure you check those out and leave a comment letting me know that you came from TikTok. Like I say at the end of all of my videos, I love you, my beloved humans, from your favorite Haitian homegirl.
Want to get creeped out? If you don't know, I've been researching the paranormal and folklore from around the world for years now, which led to me becoming a paranormal investigator. Please watch this video if you like creepy content, if you like the paranormal, the supernatural, folklore, and especially if you have followed me for a while, because I have some things that are sad that I want to share, but also some really exciting things. For a really long time, I was very consistent with posting every day about different folklore and paranormal stories, but I've gone through a period where I really haven't been consistent, which is because I've gone through something that's really hard. I can't share the details because it involves other people, but throughout this time, I've also just really struggled with my mental health in general. Some of you might also know that I have a podcast with my sister called Just a Little Stitious. Now my TikTok and my YouTube is named that for consistency and ease, but I will always be the Queer Crypt. We also took a break from posting because my sister went through something devastating. I also can't get into the details on that because it involves other people. We just needed each other's support and we took time away from everything else and just tried to support each other. That being said, we could really use your support right now. So I'll let you know the ways in which you can do that. First of all, if you're able to follow us on the longer storytelling platform, that helps us a lot because we are Canadian and the TikTok app is great for us reaching audiences, but it doesn't really do anything else for us as we don't have a creator fund here. We're very limited as to what brands will work with us because of A, the fact that we're Canadian, and B, the fact that our niche is paranormal and folklore and creepy and horror. If you're feeling really generous, consider joining our Patreon, where we have our weird little community chatting about the strange and unusual, where you'll have the opportunity to become part of our research team if that's something you're interested in, which is at the moment just Jess and I. We'll also be sharing a creepy game or ritual story once a month that is for Patreon only, like the Three Kings ritual, the 11-mile drive, the Answer Man, the Man in the Fields, the Midnight Game, the list goes on. We'll be doing monthly lives where we do paranormal investigations, investigating haunted dolls, hosting horror movie nights, and just causing general chaos. There's merch involved in some of our tiers, like this cute sticker, this sick art print, this amazing mug, and this bomb.com t-shirt. Humble brag. Or check out our merch on our Etsy shop. So here are some updates. We are taking a Christmas break from the podcast right now because I also have an update with that. Surprise, I'm writing a book. I'm working with Crossed Crow Books out of Chicago and working on a book that you guys are literally going to fucking love. I can't tell you the details yet, but I know that most of the people who follow me, they will love it. Okay, this book will be... it'll be good. It's not going to be a long break. I just really need to finish writing the book. You know what I mean? We will be coming back with a vengeance in January. I also just want to say thank you so much to people who have been here for a really long time or even from the beginning. I know you guys care about what's going on with me and I care what goes on with you. I notice you being in the comments or being in my lives and it means a lot more than I can even tell you because I am literally just a girl who likes creepy shit and folklore and ghosts and talking about it. And I love talking about it with you guys. So thank you for being here at all. And if that's all you're able to do, then that still means the world. I hate being mushy, but it's just the truth.
The train from Shrewsbury rolled into Llangunthlow at 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and Dana stepped gingerly onto the empty platform, her heart beating a little too fast. The moon peeked between the scudding clouds as she checked her phone. No signal. It had cut out somewhere around Broome, and Dana wondered if Lou would remember to pick her up. Friends Christmas. They'd always talked about how much fun it would be, but it never happened until this year. Dana's mum and stepdad Steve had decided to visit his family in Australia. Dana hated smug Steve and politely turned down the invitation. They haven't even offered to pay for her ticket. She was broke. Steve knew this, and she reckoned he did it deliberately to distance her from her mother. Her best mate Lou was always there for her, though. They were like sisters. Lou had told her over many pints at their local pub that she needed to be kinder to Steve. Her mum was grieving, and this was just her chance at being happy again.
No, this is wrong.
Wrong. Dana sighed and agreed. Look, just come and stay in Wales with us, Dee. It'll be just me, Mum, and Choo Choo. We'd all love to have you. Choo Choo was the beloved family cat. A grumpy old boy who liked to hiss at plants and scale curtains if you went near him. Dana couldn't understand the appeal. The cat seemed to have an intelligence that unnerved her, but she was deeply grateful to have a place to go. Lou's mum, Jane, was a wonderful woman who'd grown up in the hippie 70s. She had a collection of crystals. She quietly practiced Wicca and always had a bit of gossip in her stew bubbling on the Aga if you pop round. The journey involved 4 train changes, and the final one was a tiny 2-carriager that required Dana to request her stop from the conductor. I want to stop at... She checked train line. Llangunthlow, please, she said. The conductor looked alarmed. Been before, have you? Never, Dana replied. Want to be careful around there, miss? You arranged to be picked up? Yeah, I think so, yeah. Righto. It's dark round there. Watch your step and... Well, watch for what? Just mind you stick to the path. Dana noticed the man looked fearful. He'd even forgot to check a ticket, and he swiftly walked away from her up the carriage. And now she was finally here. She watched the train pull away and pulled her woolen coat tight around her. Her Google Maps told her that the nearest point of natural beauty was break-your-neck water. It was so absurd that Dana had laughed inwardly. Stop creeping yourself out, she thought. You're just a London kid afraid of the dark. A distant car horn cut through the light whistling wind, and Dana jumped. Lou, she must be here. She trundled through a small dark footpath and saw the headlights. Thank God. Dana already could taste the mulled wine that must be brewing, the fire crackling and sputtering, and she was even looking forward to petting Choo Choo. The headlights flashed in quick succession and Dana waved. Jesus, Lou, I didn't realise how remote this place was. You going to help me with my bags or what? Dana called over. The car remained still. She's probably listening to some hideous country music, Dana thought fondly. Feeling a rush of relief and love for her friend, she walked towards the passenger side of the car. As she did, the car reversed back. She stopped. So did the car. She walked forward, the car lurched back. Yeah, very funny, Dana shouted. Her breath puffing smoke in front of her. Look, it's Baltic. Can we save the games for later? The car didn't move. Lou didn't wind the window down and Dana squinted, trying to see her outline. Lou was kind of placid, so this behaviour was a bit weird. She looked at the car itself, a Mini. Lou doesn't have a Mini, she thought. Neither does Jane. As the realisation that this wasn't her friend, Dana heard the engine rev into life.
Oh dear.
A squeal of tyres as the car lurched towards her.
Oh God.
She leapt aside just as the car ploughed forwards, clearly trying to have knocked her down. She screamed as the car reversed and then revved off into the night, leaving her panting on the dark footpath. She could have sworn as she looked at the silhouette of the driver, she saw a long beard and a hat. She fumbled for her phone, desperately checking for signal, nothing. What just happened? Distantly, she heard a car approaching. Oh, God, please don't let it be him. Please don't come back. She scanned around her. An empty house, fields for miles, and thick clouds. The car was coming closer. A musty old Volvo. Lou. Oh, thank God. Dana was crying at this point. A madman was on the loose. She'd been here 2 seconds, and the local axe murderer had tried to run her over. Lou jumped out the car. Dana, you made it! God, what happened? The girls bundled themselves into the Volvo and a teary Dana told her everything. They got to the little cottage, hidden amongst the forest, still yabbering away about theories. You need a wine. Lou poured them both 2 large Sovi bees. Mum's in the bath. She won't notice if we get through the good stuff. Lou, I know this sounds nuts, but the driver looked like Santa. Lou paused. Her eyes went wide and then she burst into hysteric fits of giggles. Dana did too. The nerves, the tension, it all seemed to melt away as they howled with laughter. The whole day had been absurd. The tiny train, the scared local train guard, the madman. And Dana felt relieved. She was with her best mate, safe in a warm cottage. So what if there was an old nutter on the loose, tearing around in his Mini? None of that mattered. She told the police in a few days. That night, after a dinner of beef bourguignon, too much red wine, and anecdotes from Jane about the locals who she suspected might have been the culprit, the 3 ladies went to bed.
Love this.
Choo Choo had been given double helpings of whiskers and was flicking his tail lazily around by the fire. Dana had muttered, "Don't scratch the presents open," as she stroked his chin and dropped her gifts for Jane and Lou by the tree. Choo Choo just purred insolently in response. Her dreams were wretched. Images of Santa Claus climbing down the chimney and scaling the wall like a hideous large spider creeping up on her, and the glare of headlights growing until they enveloped her and she felt the bones crunch under the tyres. She gasped awake, grabbed her phone. 3:33 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
A horrible creeping fear crawled up her body. Something had woken her up. She went still, straining her ears, whistling. The house was totally isolated and stood alone in the valley, so who was that? Dana shivered. The whistling was getting further away. Maybe she imagined it. She peeped round the thick floral curtain. It was too dark to make anything out. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She tried to calm her breathing. No use. That madman had rattled her. She couldn't shake it off. Choo Choo. He was pacing around, mewing downstairs. Sod it, Dana thought. You can't sleep. Just light a fire and hang out with the cat. Just relax. You're okay here. The cat probably wants company too, Dana figured. She wrapped a fluffy dressing gown round her, lit a candle, and paced downstairs. "Merry Christmas, Choo," she whispered. The cat brushed and darted between her legs, meowing. He was being nicer than usual. The fire had died in the hearth. The log basket was empty. Dana considered her options. Go back to bed? No. She needed to take her mind off things, read, light a fire. The log shed was beyond the drive towards the forest. She almost laughed at the idea of walking into the night, but she just needed to be brave. Whatever whack job was out there was likely asleep now. Besides, he couldn't know that she was here. She stepped outside into the cold air. The candle immediately snuffed out. I'm not in a Victorian novel, she whispered to herself as she thumbed her phone torch on instead. Chew meowed even louder now. She felt like it was a warning. An owl hooted in the distance. Hello.
Weird.
As Dana approached the log shed, she shone her phone light on the door, lifted the hatch and peered in. Logs for days, huge piles of them. What was that? Something glinted from the torchlight. The unmistakable outline of a car. A mini. Dana froze. No way. She picked her way over the logs to the vehicle. There were large barn doors at the back of the shed. This was the Mini by the station. Why was it here? Hidden in a shed, what was going on? Dana suddenly got a terrible sinking feeling of being watched. She approached the car, shone the light into the driver's seat. Nothing. She shone the light into the passenger's seat. No one. She shone the light into the back. Was someone sitting in the back?
Oh.
Her heart was hammering. Dana got closer. Who's there? She shouted into the dark. She thrust her phone at the dark window of the back seat. No one. But the light caught something. A fake beard. A large floppy Santa hat.
Oh dear.
What? And then she heard it. Singing. A woman's voice. You better not run. You better not hide. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. From the shadows stepped Jane. Merry Christmas, darling, she said quietly.
No.
You're up terribly early. Or maybe you've just stayed up late.
Oh, she's lost her mind.
She giggled. Which is it?
Oh dear.
Dana stared. Jane's eyes were glittering with menace. She was wearing an oversized lilac dressing gown, and in one hand, dangling at her side, she held a large butcher's knife.
Oh no.
Jane? What? That was you? Yes, darling. Me. Nearly got you, didn't I? I deliberately missed, though. It was just a bit of silly Christmas fun. Jane, have I done something to upset you? Should we just go back inside and we can talk it through? Talkie's so boring. No fun. I want my present now. Jane took a step towards her. Her face suddenly dropped. She looked terribly sad. I miss him, you know, she said. Hughie. Dana felt a surge of anger. Her late father, Hugh. Where was this going? He just didn't do as I asked. I'm a very reasonable woman, aren't I, Dana? I never asked too much. Dana felt a dreadful chill sweep over her. Can't leave her, Jane. Dana would never forgive me. I have to think of Dana. Dana this, Dana that. She giggled. He was obsessed with you. Jane lifted the knife to Dana's throat. Do you know, I hate you, Dana. You took my chance of happiness. I want to slice you into little pieces like I did with your father. Dana gripped the log she'd picked up earlier and squeezed it tight behind her back. Jane had lost her mind. Yeah. She ducked behind the car, rolled to the ground as she heard a man. What does Santa say? You'd better not hide! From the corner of her eye, Dana saw the slashing of a knife, frenzied, reaching for her. She grabbed the car door handle, but it was locked. Dana screamed as loud as she could. Jane was on her now. Where was Lou? Was she really sleeping through this? Just be good, for goodness sake! Jane cackled. Dana backed into the wall of logs. She was trapped. This was it. She hurled a log with all her might from her hands at Jane, but she missed, and it shattered the windscreen. Jane hooted with laughter. You missed! You missed! Dana realised she'd die here, carved like a pumpkin by a woman she'd known all her life, the woman who'd gotten away with murdering her father. Jane got within inches of Dana's face. It's no wonder you and Lou get on so well, like sisters. Lou appeared over the logs. Blonde hair dangling down, looking at Dana. Morning, Dee. You know, he never accepted me as his daughter. Never. Not one measly birthday card. You got all his love. His affections. You know how that feels, Dana? This was all a nightmare. A horrible, sordid soap opera nightmare that she just needed to wake up from. Mummy, let's get rid of her. She clambered over the logs and stood next to her mother. We'll say it was a tragic accident, just like Daddy. But Lou, why did you never... I never knew. It's not my fault. Yeah. But it was too late. Too late. No empathy registered on Lou's face. There was only glistening rage. Jane's arm lifted high in the air and Dana shut her eyes tight. But then she heard a gasp and a Choo-choo! He'd leapt over the logs, and with his claws outstretched, he was slashing at Jane's face. She was shrieking now, and Lou backed away. She took her moment, and Dana ran. She ran as fast as her legs would carry her. The cat had given her a chance. How would she ever dislike Choo-choo? Her eyes streamed. She just needed the car keys to the Volvo, and she'd drive away like her life depended on it. They were in the hallway. She grabbed them. She tore outside. She glanced over to the log shed. Dawn was breaking now. Bloodied and panting, Lou and Jane were sprinting across the lawn at her. Ahead of them, Choo-choo. He'd never looked so elegant, racing towards her. She flung the Volvo door open. The cat was making a beeline for her. She wasn't leaving without him. Quick! Run, Choo, run! Without hesitating, eyes fixed on his target, Choo-choo flung himself into the Volvo onto Dana's lap, and she slammed the door shut. Keys in ignition, slamming a foot on the accelerator, Dana sped out of the driveway, flow into the night. As she zoomed away from the dreaded cottage, glancing every now and then at her beloved feline, she could have sworn the cat's eyes looked familiar. A dark green that she knew and loved so well. Her father's eyes. But it had been a long night. All she knew was that life wasn't going to be so lonely anymore.
Oh.
She scratched his long fur and said, "We're safe now. Merry Christmas, Choo." The end.
It was shared anonymously by someone who says that he feels a lot of shame around this story, but he feels like what happened left a profound effect on him and how he views life. And he never really thought a lot about alternate realities or multiverses or anything like that until this experience. But he feels like it's important to share. Maybe somebody out there needs to hear this. If you're new here, this series is called Spooky Scary Storytime, where I share listeners' true stories about the things that they think nobody else would believe. The story takes place in 2021, and the person who sent this said that at the time he was 24 years old and he was living a very carefree life. He had just moved to a new city with his parents. He was living at home. He didn't have many friends, and because he didn't have many friends, he was going out all the time to music bars in order to meet people. This is what he's not proud of, because he said he would go out, he would drink heavily, and then he would make the long rural drive home afterward. He said, "I'm not proud of it, but after what happened, it will never happen again, and I'm grateful for the experience." So on this one particular night, he's out, he's ordering doubles. He had a lot more to drink than usual, and he stayed out a lot later than he normally would. He ended up getting in his car, driving home, and at some point he fell asleep behind the wheel. He said he doesn't remember falling asleep, but he remembers waking up. Something in him screamed, "Wake up," and he opened his eyes. He was disoriented, and it took him a second to get his bearings before he realized he was speeding down a 2-lane road headed straight for a pole. He grabbed the wheel, corrected the car, and drove home wide-eyed and panicked. And he said he doesn't know how, but he knows inherently that he would have passed had he not woken up, had something in him not screamed at him to wake up. He said, "I just felt it in my bones. I knew that I would have died." So he swore to himself that it would never happen again. He drove home and he swore that he would never tell this story. He said, "I would never tell a soul. I would keep that shame of my decision to drink and drive." But I got home, and the next morning I was awake in the kitchen. I was making coffee, and my mom came over and hugged me and told me how much she loved me. And she told me that she'd just woken up from this horrible dream that I had passed in a car accident. She tells him that it was the most vivid dream that she had ever had, and she woke up crying because he had gone through the windshield. And he said he stood there completely frozen in the moment. She had no idea about what happened the night before, but he understood that in some timeline that actually did happen. He said prior to that day, he had never even given thought to the idea of a timeline shift, but he thinks that that must have happened because he said from that day forward, there was an old him and a new him. Not that his soul had changed, but that the things that were important to him before were no longer important, and that he had a new drive and a new growth. He said he wanted to better himself, almost like he was on a new path. Said he wonders why he was given another chance, but several years later now he is married. He feels like he's with the person that is his soulmate, and he feels like he knew from the second he met this person that that was his soulmate, and he wonders if the reason that he lived was so he could live a life with his soulmate. He said he often thinks about that day and how if it had gone any differently, he wouldn't be here to experience the life that he's living now, and he wanted to share this, though anonymously, because of the shame of this story, because he thinks that maybe it'll help somebody who needs to hear it. If you have a story that you think nobody else would believe, please send it in. We would love to hear it.
There is a reason why people say not to go near those staircases in the woods, because what happens in this next story could be a very good example of that. This next story goes into the lineup of Rob's creepy search and rescue stories. In a few of my other stories, I had mentioned that Rob was asking around to other fellow search and rescue officers to see if they had any creepy stories of their own. For this story, we're going to call this guy Joe. Joe says that a few years ago, he and his girlfriend were out camping. They were camping about 2 miles out from the road. When they went to bed and tried to fall asleep, it was almost impossible because they kept hearing something. It was the sound of grinding, similar to the sound of like when somebody grinds their teeth in their sleep. Joe's girlfriend was freaking out, and he was trying to calm her down and tell her, "You just have to ignore it, because he had heard sounds like this before out in the woods at night, and that's what you do. You just ignore it. You know, because that sounds pretty standard for being in the woods. So Joe says eventually she ends up falling asleep, and so did he. But then about 2 hours into it, he wakes up with a really uneasy feeling. Joel rolls over to check on his girlfriend, and she's not there. So he springs up out of bed, opens the tent, and he's yelling out for her. But he says he didn't have to search long because he did see her standing there. He said she was standing at the edge of camp with her back towards the tent, and it seemed like she was staring at something through the bushes. He said that the fire was pretty dim, but it was light enough that he could see when he approached her that she looked really pale. Joe says he went to ask her what was going on, but she was dead asleep, but her eyes were open. He said she had this really dead, spaced out look in her eyes, and he put his arm around her and he tried to say, "Come on, let's go back to bed," but she refused to move. And then she said to him in a really low, groggy tone, "I have to go now. I have to go. It's here." And he's like, no, come on. You're just sleepwalking. Let's go back to bed. And she refused. She insisted that she needed to stay there because she had to go. So Joe is super confused, and he is just looking at her, trying to make sense of the situation. And then he kind of follows her gaze and looks to see, what is she looking at? And then Joe said there, sitting about 15 yards ahead, was one of those freaking staircases. He said it was gray and looked like concrete, and then she started walking towards it. So right away, he lunges and grabs her by the arm and yanks her back, and that kind of snapped her out of it and woke her up. She is baffled and looking at him like he's crazy, and she's like, "What the F am I doing out of the tent?" Joe didn't really answer her fully and tell her what actually was going on. He just kind of said, "You were just sleepwalking," and he let her back into the tent. He said the grinding had stopped then, so she fell back asleep pretty quickly. And then he kind of just ended the story there and just said, I don't really like thinking about it. It really makes you wonder, what if he didn't wake up and catch her in time? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you have a creepy story of your own that you'd normally keep to yourself because it seems too creepy to be true, please send it to the email in my bio. I would love to read it and possibly share it anonymously or otherwise.
Okay, let's read a creepy story that was sent to us. This one is a little different. It's like scary and creepy, but in a different way. It's a creepy teacher story. So I am going to give y'all a trigger warning because this disgusting teacher is just gross. And he's not doing nice things. But the girl that sent me this message wants me to share her story. Maybe someone's been through something similar. But anyway, let's get into it. So this happened a few years ago in my secondary school. I'm from England, so I was around 15 years old. One of the teachers had suddenly fallen quite ill, so we had a lot of supply teachers covering the lessons as there was a shortage of teachers in our area. Everything went well for the first few weeks, but one day we had a new supply teacher who was supposed to be a longer cover. During the first lesson I had with him, we were on computers doing our work, and he repeatedly kept standing behind me and my friends and getting a little too close. He seemed really interested in our work compared to the others in the class. He only stayed by us despite the others in the class messing around. At first, I didn't think much of what happened, as I just assumed maybe he just didn't know what to do, and I ignored how he kept pushing himself against our chairs. Then comes Friday, and we were on the computers again, and everyone was messing around as it was the last Friday before a long weekend, so no one really did the work. I was completing the homework, but everyone else was just taking it at a slower pace and talking, and the teacher didn't seem to mind. Maybe 10 minutes into the lesson, he came over to me and my friend, who is also a girl, and our guy friend who sat next to us, and told us about a video he wanted to show only me and my female friend after the class. We were confused as to why he only wanted us to see it, so I asked our guy friend to ask if he could see it too, and the teacher told him no, and that it was only for us two girls. When he came back again, he threatened to send our guy friend to isolation for apparently not completing the work yet. This was when we started to panic because he refused to move away from us girls. And during this time, his entire lower half was right next to me and my friend's faces on purpose, and he kept pushing it into the back of my chair and making subtle, inappropriate comments and hand touching. It even went so far that he stood in front of our laptops so we couldn't talk to the guys in the front, and he was completely pressed against my laptop so I couldn't touch it to move it without touching him on the lower half.
This occurred for around 20 minutes before some students in the back broke a computer, so he finally went away. We used this time to quickly talk to the guys in the front of us, and this is when they revealed that when we had been walking up the stairs, the teacher was looking up our skirts. Due to the commotion the boys caused, he told me and my friends to get a teacher to deal with this problem, and we agreed immediately as we couldn't stay there. So we found a teacher and explained roughly what had been happening, and he agreed it was very strange. As we went back to the classroom, the teacher went to the back with the supply, and I started to panic, and I couldn't stay there as everything hit me. I don't know why I was trying to ignore what was happening, but I walked out of the class with no warning. I immediately found one of the teachers and explained everything that had happened, and they took me to the library to make a statement. After the lesson had finished, the people who also saw what happened had to write statements whilst me and my friend were panicking really bad. During the time, the school provided no explanation for what would happen to the teacher and expected me to return to lessons. There were no calls made to our parents until 3 hours later when I was physically ill from how stressed I was. I know it may seem like such a small thing, but my entire secondary school experience changed after that, and I struggled really bad to return and even sit in exams. The teachers wouldn't provide much support and gave up on me when the original teacher returned, but I tried to explain that I couldn't go back in the classroom. After a series of intense panic attacks, I couldn't return, so I went on study leave as it was exam season. We never did find out what was on the video, but I'm glad that I'm finally out of that school. That is so disgusting and disturbing, and I feel so bad for this girl that nobody took her seriously. I mean, that's a huge problem that we have all around the world, is nobody taking victims seriously, and this girl was a child when this happened to her. So to me, it sounds like someone needs to get their ass beat. But it sounds like that teacher isn't at that school anymore, and she's not at that school anymore. Hopefully that freaking dude isn't teaching anywhere else, but I wanted to get this girl's story out there because she asked me to, and if anybody else has been through something like this, I'm really sorry, and that sucks. You're supposed to feel safe at school, and a lot of people make that hard, and mostly men, let's be real. Anyway, I wish this girl an amazing life, and I'm glad she is away from that freaking weirdo. Let's read another scary Reddit story. I started locking my door, but it didn't help. I sleep with my bedroom door closed. I always have. It's not a fear thing, it's just how I've slept since I was a kid. I like knowing the door is shut. I like the quiet. So when I noticed the door open one night, I assumed I forgot to close it properly. I got up, closed it, and went back to bed. Later that night, I woke up again. I don't know why. No noise, no bad dream, just that feeling you get when something feels off. I looked at the door and it was open again. Not wide open, just a few inches. I remember thinking it was weird but not scary. Old house, uneven floors, maybe air pressure. I closed it again, and this time I made sure the latch clicked. The next night it happened again. I woke up around the same time, sometime after 3. The door was open wider than before, enough that I could see into the hallway. The hall light was off, but it wasn't fully dark. I could see the outline of the wall. I closed the door and stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. Completely quiet. After the 3rd night, I started paying attention. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night, the door was open a little more than the last time. Never slammed open, never all at once, just slow progress, like someone was testing how far they could go without being noticed. I started locking the door. The first night I locked it, I woke up to the same feeling. The door was still closed, but the handle was turned slightly downward. Not enough to open it, just enough to show that pressure had been applied. That was when I stopped sleeping properly. I put a chair under the handle the next night. When I woke up, the chair was tipped over on its side. The door was still closed, but the lock was turned. I know I locked it. I remember checking it twice. The worst part is that nothing ever came in. No footsteps, no breathing, no shadows, just the door changing position a little more every night. Last week I woke up and the door was open enough that I could see straight down the hallway to the living room. I didn't move, I just watched it. After a few seconds, the door moved. Not opening, not closing, just a small adjustment, like someone on the other side realized I was awake. I sleep with the lights on now, and I don't close the door anymore. It seems happier when I leave it open. Okay, so I need y'all to leave a comment. Are you team open door or closed door when you go to sleep?
1978, the coast of New Taipei City, Taiwan. And there, buildings that looked like something straight out of a science fiction film was being constructed. Cylindrical structures joined top and bottom. So people called them the Sanzhi UFO houses. The design was inspired by Finnish architect Matti Saronen's revolutionary Futuro houses. In the late 1960s, Saronen designed these elliptical pods as ski cabins that could be airlifted by helicopter and assembled in just 2 days. And this wasn't just any resort. It was specifically designed to attract American military officers stationed across East Asia. And wealthy Taiwanese families were also targeted, looking for unique vacation properties. The project was developed by Hongguo Group in collaboration with Yuzhou, a local plastics manufacturer. With government support, they planned swimming pools, water slides, landscaped ponds, and modern interiors. Tens of thousands of square meters of oceanfront land, and it was supposed to be magnificent. But the strange thing was that no one ever came to vacation there. Despite all the money invested, the resort never welcomed a single guest. The doors remained firmly shut, and at night, only flickering lights could occasionally be seen through the broken windows. Some people say that place wasn't a city. It was a tomb. Local people say someone disturbed the dragon statue, and that is why it was cursed. In 1978, Taiwan's economy was in its golden age. Around that time, Yuzhou, a famous plastics manufacturer in Sanzhi, announced an ambitious project. Sanzhi Pod City, Taiwan's future, represented by an ultra-luxury beachside resort. Dozens of UFO-shaped homes would stretch along the coastline near Danshui. Each building featured prefabricated concrete bases topped with fiber-reinforced plastic exteriors, colorful oval forms resembling flying saucers. And the Hongguo Group partnered with Yuzhou to make this vision reality, with full government support. Construction began in grand fashion. Hundreds of workers were deployed every day. The sounds of concrete pouring and crane machinery echoed through the coastal air. But that peace didn't last long. Just weeks after construction began, the first accident occurred. A massive crane suddenly lost its balance and toppled over, crushing workers beneath it. They investigated the cause, but nothing unusual turned up. The experts simply said the crane just fell over, strangely. Days later, a site supervisor died in a car accident on his way home from work. And then another worker collapsed on site from a sudden heart attack. One worker who was there at the time later said, "That site was strange. The tents would shake. Tools moved on their own. And every lunchtime, I heard someone calling my name." Around that time, ominous rumors began spreading through the worksite. It's the curse of the dragon. So at the entrance to the resort stood an old dragon statue. It had been a guardian spirit watching over the village for generations. But the construction company wanted to widen the road for their vehicles. And so they cut the dragon statue in half. So in Taiwan, dragons are sacred protectors, and destroying or damaging a dragon statue is considered one of the worst possible acts, an invitation for terrible misfortune. Everyone just dismissed it as superstition, but remarkably, accidents continued without stopping after that day. Mysterious red stains appeared at the construction site. Doors rattled, even without wind. Unexplainable cracks formed on the concrete walls. Underground pipes burst for no reason. One worker who stayed behind alone at night to organize equipment later described what he saw through a window. It wasn't human. Something was just watching me. Its eyes were so big, I could only see the whites. After that day, he never returned to the site. gradually workers began quitting. And just like that, the construction site had lost all its laughter. Every day, people were getting hurt. The managers couldn't understand why. Why did accidents keep happening only at this place? Those were the words of the manager who took over after the site supervisor's death. But he too collapsed days later with an unexplained high fever. And that is when the term Curse of the Dragon began spreading seriously among local residents. As stories spread among villagers about the bisected dragon, word circulated that the dragon's wrath had been provoked. Every night, something like a large shadow moved near the artificial lake. At night, lights from somewhere inside the resort's window would flicker. And those were definitely not lights that people had turned on. Nobody was there. And some said those lights were the dragon's eyes, red, slowly moving, watching over the entire city. One villager said, after that day, blessings disappeared from this village, and every night we heard the dragon crying. The construction site had descended into chaos. Workers quit one by one out of fear. Those who remained complained of strange physical symptoms. And most disturbing of all, several workers just killed themselves. According to various sources, close to 20 people died at this site over just 2 years of construction. And the exact number remains unknown because, and this is the truly chilling part, the Hongguo group allegedly destroyed all records of construction accidents and on-site deaths. The victims became nameless, and in Taiwanese belief, nameless spirits are the most restless of all. But the company didn't stop construction. Too much money had been invested. And finally, in 1980, construction was declared complete, but no one would move in. Though construction was finally complete, sales were disastrous. Rumors had already spread everywhere. And even those who had already signed contracts began canceling. And the construction company was trapped. In 1980, Yuzhou Co. went bankrupt. The Hongguo Group faced massive investment losses. And so the resort, though completed, was thoroughly abandoned. As the years passed, rust formed, windows shattered, and red moss spread across the walls. But people said the site was never truly empty. And then there was the other story. According to local legend, the land held a dark secret far older than the dragon statue. Rumors spread that the site sat atop an old burial ground, a mass grave from Taiwan's brutal colonial past.
Would you know what a ghost looked like if you've seen one? Every day we encounter ghosts. We just don't realize it. Think about today. You probably went to the store, you probably went to work, or you probably rode the subway. How many people did you encounter? And think about it, you walk past these people. You don't know who they are. You don't really think about it. But how many of those people might have been a ghost? Now, we think of ghosts as sort of being these transparent things that you could see through and are terrifying and creepy. But most reports of encounters with ghosts are just regular, normal people that people who encounter them don't even realize that they are ghosts. Now, that's true in these two stories. There's this man who was driving from Dallas to Oklahoma, and he said he happened to be on this back highway. Now, he had just bought this brand new vehicle, and this was his first time taking it on a long road trip. So as he's going down this dark, remote highway that cut through a bunch of cornfields, he said he started to hear his tire making a funny sound. And then all of a sudden he hears an explosion, and his tire had blown. So he pulls his vehicle off to the side of the road. And he gets out and he starts looking for a spare tire. Well, he soon realizes that he doesn't have a tire jack. But then out of nowhere comes this old 1950s pickup truck. And it had this wooden boxed-in bed. And this man steps out. He's sort of this taller African-American man wearing these jean overalls. And he's got some black boots on. And he said this man walked over to him and said, hey, let me help you out. Looks like you're having some car trouble. So he goes to his truck and he gets out this very old looking jack. And he jacks up the truck. He puts the tire on for him. And so this man, he wants to offer this guy some money for helping him. But the guy says, no, I don't want it. I'm not going to accept it. He says, just make sure you do good to someone else. He says, okay, I'll see you later. And he gets in his truck and he drives away. And at first he thought, that's kind of strange. That guy just came out of nowhere. And it was right as I needed a jack. So he gets in his car and he drives down the road and he gets to like this nearest town. And he happens to stop into this old diner. And as he's sitting there, he starts talking with the waitress. And he tells her about, how this nice man, I don't know if he's from this town, but he helped me, get the tire on my truck. And like, if you see him again, tell him I said thank you. And the waitress looks at him and said, oh, you seen Gus? He said, Gus? Who's Gus? And she said, oh, Gus is the friendly ghost that lives on that highway. He was driving one night and he was in an accident. And he was this nice old man that liked to help people. And still to this day, people say they encounter him when they're having car trouble or something is going wrong. Now, this next story takes place in Arkansas. There's this woman, she said that she had just moved to Little Rock. And she said every day when she would drive home, she would turn onto her street. And on the corner, there was this blue house. And she would see this old woman in sort of this checkered nightgown standing on the edge of her yard, just staring off into the distance. She said she didn't move. She just stood there. And she would drive past her. She would pull into her house. And that woman would still be out there. And sometimes she'd be standing in her yard for like hours. She said one day she drove home. And she sees the woman standing out there. But as she pulls in her driveway, she gets out of her vehicle. And she said right as she turned around, there was a woman standing at the edge of her driveway. And she's like, how in the world did she get from the corner of the street to in front of my house that fast? So she turns back into her car, grabs something, and when she turns around, she was gone. Well, shortly after this, she talks to one of the neighbors. And she starts asking her, who's the neighbor on the end that, is always outside in the checkered nightgown? And the woman seemed confused. She said, who are you talking about? And then she goes, oh, you mean there used to be this lady, Miss Martin, who lived on the corner house. But she passed away 10 years ago. She always would stay up and sit out in front of her house or stand out in front of her house. And she wore this checkered nightgown.
Have you taken on a luxurious shopping spree where you have to pick out 3 separate outfits? You have a big night ahead of you. You feel a little bit like a real-life Cinderella because you've been told that you get to meet a very special prince. You're shopping, but not at stores that girls your age should be shopping at. You're taken into adult stores that specifically make the store employees look at you in a certain way because a child should not be shopping for clothing with such little coverage. But you pick out 3 separate outfits. You take them home and wait until it's time to meet your special prince. And then you see him. He takes one look at you and he's asked to guess your age. He says, I think you're 17 years old, and I think I know that because my daughters are only a little bit younger than you. The adults in the room joke around as if 17 years old was starting to get a little bit too old, saying, quote, I guess we will have to trade her in soon, end quote. You are then left alone to service the prince, and then he rapes you. You are 17 years old, and he is 41-year-old Prince Andrew. Do you want to know what it was really like to be a victim of Jeffrey Epstein? Because she's telling us everything. Virginia Giuffre traveled the world for over 2 years with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Her job? To do whatever they asked her to do whenever they asked her to do it. This included what she described to be a former governor of New Mexico, billionaire number 1, billionaire number 2, billionaire number 3, scientist, a respected U.S. senator, the former governor of a western state, numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and quote, other world leaders. In her book released in October of 2025, Virginia, for the first time ever, tells us her full story of not only what those 2 years were like in her life, but also the before and the after Epstein and Maxwell. She writes about everything they put her through and how she ultimately managed to escape. She calls out some of the men that she was trafficked to by name while also holding back on other names out of fear, writing, quote, you may notice that while I've named some men in this book, I have not named all of the men I was trafficked to. Partly that is because I still don't know some of their names. Partly too, that is because there are certain men who I fear naming. The man who brutally raped me towards the end of my time with Epstein and Maxwell, for example, the man who I've called the former prime minister in court documents, I know his name and he knows what he did to me, even though when others have sought out comment from him about my allegations, he has denied them. I fear that this man will seek to hurt me if I say his name here. Virginia feared multiple men in the same way, one of those men who she was forced to pleasure many times, and a man who she also witnessed having sexual contact with Epstein himself. But out of fear of what those men could be capable of, she held back on naming some. However, there is a plethora of other names in this book. And today, I'm going to be telling you Virginia Giuffre's story using only information that I've gathered from the book, and I have to say the following. I am not calling out these people. I'm only sharing information that I've read that I think is important to spread. I am not an expert in anything. I really don't know anything, and I'm not claiming to. What is true and what is not, I cannot say because I did not live this. I wasn't there. I don't know any of these people, and I have no way of proving anything. The only intention that I have filming this video is getting Virginia's story out there because that is what she wanted. This is her story, not mine. I just think it's a very important one to tell, but she did spend the time writing this book for a reason, and I do think that to get the full story, you should go and read her book because I simply cannot talk about every single little thing she wrote in the book, or else this video would be 3 hours long. Trigger warning also, this video is so heavy. The things in it are so horrendous. So if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health or trigger you in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video and I will see you in my next one. There's a lot to get through, so let's get into it. Virginia Giuffre's childhood years were tough. As a young teenager, her mother saw her as an inconvenience and as a kid who was out of control. Because of that, one day her mother told her that she was taking her to go and see an eye doctor, when in reality she was driving to drop her off at a place called Growing Together, just south of West Palm Beach. Growing Together was a type of reformatory school in which kids with behavioral issues were sent to improve their behavior, but if anything, it was only a place that welcomed abuse, and it felt like a prison, even down to having security gates and barred windows. There was a room referred to as the White Room. The longest time that Virginia spent in that room at a time was 3 weeks. In that room, you would be sent there as a punishment, and it was basically like solitary confinement. There was nothing in it other than the cold concrete floor. Counselors there would not hold back on what they deemed to be reasonable punishments, one counselor even breaking a kid's arms. Staff members were not much better. There was a guard whose favorite thing to do was throw the kids onto the floor or against the walls when they got out of line. Not to mention the kids there were brutal to each other, but that was a good thing for the staff members because if the kids quote-unquote supervised and punished and restrained each other, then that meant less work for them. In 2004, the New Times newspaper published an article on Growing Together, pointing out the different scenarios in which its employees encouraged, quote, beatings, restraint, imprisonment, and systematic humiliation, end quote. And 18 months after that article was published, Growing Together closed down for good. But that was only part of what ultimately shaped Virginia to be the kind of teenager that she grew up to be. Life at home was also an endless torment, which explains the many attempts that she had at running away. However, at one point in her life, it wasn't. She actually loved living at home with her family, and only for very, very few years of her life does Virginia remember being loved and cared for. But once that went away, the feeling of being loved and even just seen as a human being was one that she would search for the remainder of her life. Virginia grew up in her family's farm, and I think you pronounce it Loxahatchee, in Florida. There she lived with her mother Lynn, her father Sky, her older half-brother Daniel, and her baby brother Sky, who Virginia liked to call Sky D. Her mother Lynn had a tough upbringing. Virginia knew this because she witnessed firsthand just how incapable her grandmother seemed to be at caring for anyone other than herself. But even though she wasn't shown love as a kid, Lynn knew how to love her children. For the first 5 years or so of her life, Virginia's mother poured love onto her. Little Virginia had little freckles that would come out the more and more time she spent out in the sun, and her mother called her freckles angel kisses. Her guy Sky was also loving. He would spend so much time with the kids, building them a tree house, building them a little bridge over the pond on their property so the kids could cross over to the other side. Playing outside while Lynn was gardening, planting sunflowers and daisies in the front yard, Sky would hang out with the kids, paying attention to all of their animals on their farm. When Virginia was only 6 years old, he bought her a horse that she named Alice, and Alice very quickly became Virginia's entire world. Every single day, as soon as she got home from school, she would be sprinting to run to Alice to take her out for a ride. She went to bed excited to wake up the next day to take Alice out for a ride. She would take her out on their land, but she would also take her to the pond where they would swim together. Alice was everything to her, and she would eventually become Virginia's only safe space. Her mom, Lynn, stopped giving her baths, and her dad stepped in. He would bathe her, and then he would start touching her in ways that nobody had ever touched her before. Then it escalated to her father forcing Virginia to touch him, and that turned into their new nightly routine. Virginia would go to sleep in her own bedroom only to be woken up by her dad's footsteps and him entering the room. He would get into her twin bed, touching her everywhere and forcing her to do the same with him. Then it started happening not only at nighttime, but also throughout the day whenever they were left home alone. And then one day, her father invited a friend of his over, a man that Virginia had always known as Uncle Forrest. Sky invited Forrest to come over and have his own way with Virginia. Forrest also had a daughter around the same age as Virginia, and Sky and Forrest liked to do what they called trade daughters. Forrest would come over, he would bathe Virginia, tuck her into bed, sexually abusing her in the process, not only with his hands, but also with his mouth and his own private parts. Sky, Virginia's father, not only gave Forrest permission to do whatever he wanted to his daughter, but he also encouraged it. And Virginia's mom, she went from being a once loving, nurturing mother to a cold human being that acted like a stranger. Not only did she just turn a blind eye to the abuse, but she also would accuse Virginia of lying, even once implying that Virginia was, quote, trying to steal her husband away from her. At a family gathering, when Virginia had reached her breaking point with her father, she lost it. And in front of extended family members, she said, quote, "This guy has been f***ing me for years, since I was a little kid, and no one's done about it," end quote. Expecting for other family members like her aunts, for example, to step in and help her, but no one did. Instead, there was just silence until Sky grabbed her and punched her in the face. After that, nobody ever spoke about it again. Time and time again, Virginia, her entire life, tried to ask for help from people that she thought that she could trust, but nobody ever helped her. They didn't even do the bare minimum, which was acknowledge what was happening to her. Virginia experienced sexual abuse not only from Sky and Forrest, but also from other boys, or should I say men. 2 months before being sent to growing together, she was assaulted for 5 to 7 hours by 2 boys, a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old in the back of the car while she was unconscious. The 3 of them had just been hanging out when she fell unconscious, and when she came back to, she woke up to the 2 of them on top of her, taking turns. It comes to no one's surprise that everything that she was going through made her feel like she had no choice but to run away, and she tried to. She ran away not only from her house, but also from growing together multiple times, once crawling out of a window and hitchhiking over 100 miles away from her house. But she was 9-10 years old when she began trying to run away. She had no money, she had no way of supporting herself, so she would find herself on the streets until an officer would pick her up and return her right back to her parents. In 1998, at 15 years old, Virginia Giuffre ran away from growing together and found herself 45 minutes away at Delray Beach. There, using the only $20 bill that she had stolen from a gas station. By the way, if you can hear that in the background, it's the wind. Using the only $20 she had, she purchased a one-way ticket to Miami, and within 20 minutes of walking around in Miami, a white van approached her asking if she needed a ride. Having no other option, Virginia accepted. The construction worker driving that van took Virginia to a motel where he raped her and held her neck down with such strength that it left her unconscious. When he was done, he pulled out a weapon and he threatened to kill her if she attempted to run out of the motel room while he stepped outside to answer a phone call. As soon as Virginia was left alone, she ran. She ran as fast as she could to try and get as much distance between her and him. And she ended up sitting on a curb in an empty beach parking lot. She was crying, bruising had started to happen around her neck, and she was so weak because she had not had real food for days. And once again, she felt a feeling that was way too familiar. She felt like all she was good for was her body. No boy, no man in her life, no one really had shown her what it meant to be cared for. She felt like they just saw her as a piece of meat to use and then discard, leaving her not only physically hurt, but also psychologically tormented as well. It was more than emotionally exhausting. And sitting on that curb in Miami, shortly after another traumatizing encounter, a limousine approached her. Ron Eppinger was the man in the limo, and he rolled down the window, making eye contact with Virginia and saying, "Oh, you poor baby, come in here so we can take care of you." Ron Eppinger was 63 years old and the owner of a modeling agency. In the limo with him, there was another young girl who smiled at Virginia through the window. Virginia was still terrified that the previous man in the white van would come looking for her and find her. She was at her lowest, and she thought that at the very least, if she made the decision to get inside of that limousine, she could put even more distance between her and the man who just attacked her. So she did. She got in the limo, and Ron told her about his agency and asked her if she would want to model for him, looking at her and saying, quote, "If you want, I can be your new daddy," end quote. The limo then drove through a drive-thru where Virginia got the food that she had been eating for days, and then Ron took her shopping afterwards for shorts that were way too short and for shirts that were way too small. Afterwards, he took her to a lingerie store and picked out different things for her. Virginia remembers thinking that it was shocking that people saw what looked to be a grandfather buying lingerie for his granddaughter, yet no one said a thing. When they got back to his apartment, Virginia met a handful of other girls around her age, most of whom were barely clothed, if at all, and most of whom barely spoke English. Ron then walked her over to his bedroom where he told her that she would be sleeping with him in his bed that had a mirror on the ceiling. The modeling agency that Ron Eppinger claimed to run was no modeling agency. In fact, it was actually an escort service. Between the years of 1977 and 1999, Ron, along with accomplices, would seek out vulnerable girls abroad, bring them to the States, and then offer them to men for $1,000 a night. Virginia was the only American girl out of the girls, and within hours of being at his house, Ron Eppinger forced her to sleep with him. Need I remind you, 15-year-old girl, 63-year-old grown man. Ron Eppinger began lending out Virginia to his friends, and she describes that time in her life as feeling like a poor puppy picked from a litter, only hoping that its new owner was not the whipping kind. In 1999, Virginia was found lying in bed next to a strange man, one of Eppinger's friends, when the FBI broke down the door, arrested the man, and removed her from the situation. Her dad picked her up and drove her all the way back home. At that point in her life, Virginia felt more trapped and more empty than she had ever felt before, and somehow, some way, she managed to be civil with her parents, not because she wanted to, but because she quite literally did not have any other option. She had no education, no money, no friends, nobody to help her. The only person who gave her a slimmer of hope, shockingly, was her own father. In the year 2000, he was working as a maintenance worker at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, and he got her a job that paid $9 an hour working as a locker room attendant at the spa. At Mar-a-Lago, her father took her to meet Trump, and in her book, she describes him by saying, quote, "He could not have been friendlier, telling me it was fantastic that I was there," end quote. Trump asked Virginia if she liked little kids. Virginia said that she did, and he connected her to other prominent people who Virginia then began babysitting for on the side. It was also at Mar-a-Lago that her path would cross with Ghislaine Maxwell's. One hot day as Virginia walked towards the spa carrying a book filled with sticky notes, a car slowed down behind her. Ghislaine Maxwell stepped out and followed her inside. Maxwell, looking like a polished, polite British woman, struck up a conversation and noticed Virginia's interest in massage therapy. With a warm smile and a friendly demeanor, Maxwell told her about a wealthy man who was looking for a traveling massage therapist, no experience necessary. That man was Jeffrey Epstein. What seemed like a chance encounter and what Virginia looked at to be hope for her future was actually a calculated recruitment by a predator who had perfected the art of identifying young, vulnerable girls. Virginia agreed to meet Epstein that evening for an interview at his house, having no idea that crossing the threshold to his Palm Beach mansion would trap her in years of trafficking, abuse, and exploitation. That same day, after her shift, her father drove her to Epstein's mansion, dropping her off and waving to Ghislaine with a smile. A different time, he dropped her off again, waving goodbye to Epstein as he escorted Virginia into his house, saying to her father, quote, "We will take good care of her." It would be years before Virginia would discover that Epstein had been paying her father in secret for all of the times that he delivered her straight to his door. In most, if not all, the pictures that can be found online of Epstein's house, the house is shown as white, but in the book, Virginia states that Epstein's house was actually pink. It was covered in pink. On the outside, on the inside, the walls, the carpets, everything was pink. Epstein saying that the reason for that was because the color of his favorite women body parts were pink, so he wanted to match that. The color pink, however, was the least alarming thing inside of that house. Once Epstein trusted Virginia enough to show her a hidden doorway next to some paintings. It was a room with a hidden entrance, so you would not notice it if you walked right past it. But in that room, Epstein had chosen to cover it with floor-to-ceiling pictures of girls wearing nothing. When he showed her that room for the first time, he said to her, "Look at my conquest. Look at how powerful I am." Later on his 48th birthday, Ghislaine Maxwell photographed Virginia in similar ways to those girls in the other pictures because that was the only thing that Epstein wanted for his birthday, pictures of Virginia to add to his collection inside of his secret room. On another occasion, Epstein also showed Virginia a plethora of videotapes that he had recorded and watched from the room in which he monitored the camera feeds in every single room in the house. Virginia Giuffre was sexually abused the very first time she stepped foot in Epstein's house. Within their first conversation, Epstein asked her if she was on birth control and then asked her to tell him about her first time. Having nothing to lose, Virginia explained her previous sexual abuse to him, and Epstein only responded to her by calling her a naughty girl. That night ended with Virginia showering Epstein, Ghislaine showing her how to scrub him down using a soap and a loofah, and Epstein then handing Virginia over $200. Virginia explains in her book that it took her years to learn that when children are abused by the people that they love, they confuse love for pain. And she grew up in a world where adult men would abuse children and where nobody did a thing about it. In her mind, as a child, growing up knowing only that, it made her think that it was normal and that was just the way that life was. Things got to a point where Epstein wanted Virginia to quit her job at Mar-a-Lago for her to be available for him at any time. She was practically on call for both Epstein and Maxwell. Even at times in the middle of the night, her phone would ring. Maxwell would say something along the lines of, "Epstein needs you," and Virginia would then go to the pink house. More oftentimes than not, there was also other young girls at the house. Epstein would engage in intimate activities with all of them against their will, and he also made them get tested for any diseases on a regular basis, not for their sake, but for his. When she quit her job, Epstein handed Virginia a stack of cash and told her to rent herself an apartment. He also pulled out a printed picture and slid it across his deck. It was a picture of Sky D, Virginia's little brother, the person that Virginia adored most in the entire world, and Epstein, picture in hand, said to Virginia, "We know where your brother goes to school. You must never tell a soul what goes on inside of this house, and I own Palm Beach Police Department, so they won't do a thing about it." It was in the year 2000 when Virginia took her first trip with Ghislaine and Epstein. Eventually, when Maxwell helped Virginia get her passport, Maxwell would then forcefully take it from her on any trips to avoid Virginia being able to escape without them. In his private plane, they flew from Palm Beach to New York and then to his 72-acre island, Little St. James, which, as we know, he loved to call Little St. Jeff's. Virginia, being available at their beck and call, continued no matter which of his properties they were in, no matter what city, what state, what country, and what Epstein demanded of Virginia wasn't always intimate acts. Virginia was to shower Jeffrey, scrubbing him down. She got him dressed, putting lotion on his feet before massaging them, before then putting on his socks and rolling them down to be how he liked them, holding his pants with the leg holes open for him to step into, tucking him into bed in his pink sheets and massaging his feet underneath the covers, then massaging his scalp until he felt soothed enough. Only then was she allowed to pull the covers up to his chin before exiting the room quietly. And sooner than later, what was expected of Virginia would once again escalate when Jeffrey Epstein began lending her out to him and Maxwell's friends. It was first what she is referred to as being billionaire number one and his wife. She was told to give the billionaire the same kind of massages that she gave to Epstein. That night, she slept with the old man, and she remembers Epstein being so incredibly proud of her. Remember when I said that wanting to feel like she was needed, or at the very least wanted, was a feeling that Virginia would chase? Epstein and Maxwell were the only people in her life ever who told Virginia that they were proud of her, that she did a good job, that she performed well. Epstein would call her his special girl. And even though obviously the situation is just about as bad as you can get, she did get a comforting feeling when Epstein would tell her how proud of her he was, and she chased that feeling for a very long time, which is why she kept doing what she did, servicing his friends for a very long time. She wanted to make Jeffrey Epstein proud, even if it was for all of the wrong reasons. Those reasons also eventually became why Virginia began recruiting girls for Epstein. His type was preferably white, with wholesome girl next door looks that made them appear between 12 to 17 years old, no piercing, no tattoos, and girls who were desperate enough. It was also preferred that Virginia go out and look for other girls to bring home to Epstein around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that was the time that high schools got out and high school girls would be walking home. The second person Virginia was sent to was on the island, and it was to a man who she described to be a psychology professor. Epstein was helping fund that professor's research and and when introducing him to Virginia, he told her, quote, "Keep him happy, like you did with your first client." The professor then asked for, quote, "one of your famous massages that Jeffrey has told me so much about," and Virginia then slept with him. That took place on the island of Little St. James, and it was also on the island that Virginia was raped multiple times by Jean-Luc Brunel. Brunel was in his 50s, and he was a well-known person. He ran a modeling agency and was very, very close friends with Epstein. For one of Epstein's birthdays, Brunel sent him 3 girls, all French and all 12 years old, to do as he pleased with them. Epstein slept with all 3 of them and then put them on a plane back to France. Brunel did the same thing with underage girls from Brazil. They were delivered to Epstein's front door. He slept with them and then put them on a plane back to Brazil. Brunel, of course, was not the only high-profile person that Virginia was introduced to. Throughout her time with Epstein and Maxwell, she also saw others constantly coming over for dinner or just to talk to Epstein about business and or flying with them on Epstein's planes, and she also often saw them at parties. Those people included people like former U.S. President Bill Clinton, billionaire Les Wexner, The Simpsons creator Matthew Groening, scientist John Brockman, who hosted a billionaire's dinner. She was also taken to one of Heidi Klum's parties. Virginia did not mention in her book engaging in intimate acts with those men, but they were frequently in contact with Epstein and around his properties. On March 10th of 2001, Ghislaine Maxwell woke Virginia up in a singy-songy voice saying, "Get out of bed, sleepyhead." It was a special day, she told her, because like Cinderella, she was going to be meeting a special prince who just so happened to be one of Maxwell's very close friends. 41-year-old Prince Andrew. When they met, they stood in Maxwell's entryway making small talk. And by the way, if I forgot to mention this, throughout this time, Virginia's family was under the impression that she was traveling around for work. Not that her parents cared, but her little brother did. Epstein and Maxwell were her employees, and she would tell people, especially her little brother, that she was just going on work trips because, of course, she didn't really want to talk about what was actually going on. And I don't even know if she realized just how bad things were until later on, but as the 4 of them are standing there talking, Virginia then remembers her mom, and she remembers thinking that her mom would be so amused that she was hanging out with the one and only Prince Andrew. So before they left to go to the club, she ran to grab her camera and she handed it to Epstein to take a picture of her and the prince. Prince Andrew's arm slid around her waist as Maxwell grinned big behind them, and Epstein snapped the photo. That image would one day become one of the most infamous photographs in the world, and it would haunt the prince for the rest of his life. The 4 of them went clubbing, and in the ride back home, Maxwell directed Virginia, quote, "When we get home, you are to do to him what you do for Jeffrey," end quote. That night, she slept with the prince, and for doing such a good job, Epstein gave her $15,000. Virginia slept with the prince one more time 1 month later. The 3rd time was on the island, and during that time, it was not only her and Prince Andrew, it was also Epstein, along with approximately 8 other young girls who did not really speak much English. About a month or so later, in May of 2001, Virginia, along with Epstein and Maxwell, attended Naomi Campbell's 31st birthday party, and a photo taken there really shows you just how much Virginia stood out of the crowd because she looks so young. She looks like a baby. She looked like she did not belong because she didn't, because she was a child. It was also around that time that Virginia was trafficked to billionaire number 2, a man she described to be a 50-year-old stranger with thinning brown hair. Following him, there were dozens of other men, some who requested that she wear outfits, others who didn't even want to look at her, even one who ignored her as she was servicing him, because the man was instead focusing on and fondling Jeffrey Epstein. For context, what Epstein and Maxwell did to Virginia seemed to get progressively more aggressive over time. Epstein used ropes, gags, a black leather collar around her neck with chains that bounded her hands and feet together. At times during their sessions, I don't even know what to call them, Virginia would pass out from being in so much pain, and when she would come back to regain consciousness, Epstein would be on top of her still doing unspeakable things. But Virginia has described the Prime Minister to be the most violent man of them all. At an island in a cabana, she was sent to him. And during her time with him, she was in and out of consciousness from being in so much pain. And when she would wake up, she would see his face laughing, continuing to do what he had been doing with a huge smile on his face. After that night with the Prime Minister, Virginia couldn't breathe or swallow without pain for days. She dropped to her knees and she begged Epstein to never send her back to him again, writing, quote, "I don't know if Epstein feared the man or if he owed him a favor, but he wouldn't make any promises, saying coldly of the politician's brutality, 'You'll get that sometimes,' end quote." Virginia serviced the Prime Minister once more on Epstein's plane. It was at that point when Virginia was at her absolute lowest point, but in the summer of 2002, when Epstein and Maxwell sat her down and told her that they wanted her to have a baby for them. Then she knew she needed to escape. The two of them were so incredibly proud of how obedient Virginia had been throughout the last couple of years. So happy that she did anything they would ask of her without complaining, that even though she was getting older and would no longer be in the age of the girls that Epstein preferred for himself, she could still be useful to them by bringing a baby and handing custody over to both of them. Virginia was not willing to birth a child and leave it in the hands of whom she referred to as, quote, two halves of a wicked whole, end quote. And for the first time in 2 years, Virginia began thinking about how she would escape. She told them that she would have their baby. She told them that she would be on board. She agreed, but said that she first wanted to get the one thing that she had wanted from the very beginning, which was to get proper training to become a masseuse. Virginia Giuffre was 16 years old when she first met Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. For her 19th birthday, she was gifted a trip to Thailand to attend an 8-week school program where she would get certified in Thai massage, and off she went to Thailand. That was different. It was a big deal because any other time that she traveled with Maxwell and or Epstein, they would take her passport. But this time, by this point, they trusted her so much that they just sent her off on their own, and that is when she escaped. In 2002, while traveling around Thailand, 19-year-old Virginia met a man named Robert Giuffre. For the first time in years, she saw a glimpse of what a different life could look like, a life outside of Epstein's control. Robert represented to Virginia something that she had almost forgot existed: genuine kindness, and apart from that, hope for an actual future. One night she confided in him, she told him everything, and Robert gave her the courage to escape. Robert told her to marry him, said that they could get married and that she would never have to return back to the States where she feared Epstein and Maxwell would then go after her. She could go back to Australia, be with Robert, that's where he lived, that's where he was from, and that's what they did. Virginia made her decision. She married Robert in Thailand on October 16th of 2002. The entire time, by the way, that she had been away, Maxwell had been calling her on the daily, but each time that Virginia would ignore her call, she would gain a little more bravery. And before her wedding date ended, Virginia found the courage to call Jeffrey Epstein. She called him and said, "I fell in love and I got married, Jeffrey. I'm never coming back." Jeffrey on the other line said, "Have a great life," before hanging up the phone. 5 years passed before she would ever hear from Epstein and Maxwell again. Believe it or not, we're only halfway through the book, but the second part of her book kind of goes into her life after the escape and then how everything got brought back up in the news with Epstein and Ghislaine and the arrest and everything that happened from her point of view. So happy to do a video on that. If you guys want that, just let me know. I'm gonna go because I've been sitting on the floor for a bit too long and my legs are numb, but let me know what you guys think and let me know if you want a second part to this video. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I really don't think there's anything more unsettling than what you just saw, what happened to Alisa Lamb. That was the last footage of her before she was found dead in a water tank on top of the Cecil Hotel. Because I just keep imagining her last day alive, buying books at a local bookstore, enjoying her solo road trip, and then going back into this creepy hotel, not knowing that she would soon become a horrible part of its history forever. I also can't imagine being one of the guests at the hotel that had black water that had an unusual taste, without knowing that Alisa had been dead inside one of the water tanks for weeks, directly causing that. This case is technically solved, but it's one of the most disturbing cases I have ever read about, in more ways than one, so let's talk about it. Alisa Lamb was 21 years old when she mysteriously disappeared and died on January 31st, 2013. She was born and raised in Canada and was a student at the University of British Columbia, although she wasn't currently registered when she died. Those who knew her said that she was one of the friendliest people that they had ever known. But what a lot of people didn't know was that Alisa struggled with her mental health. This was kind of like a silent struggle for her up until she was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder and depression. She was then put on a handful of medications to help treat this. After her diagnosis, she opened up a lot about going through life with mental health issues on a blog/Tumblr page. In one post, she detailed how at the end of 2012, she had what she referred to as a mental health relapse. This made her drop several classes at school. As a way to start the year fresh though, Alisa planned to solo travel across the coast coast of California, and having never been there before, she was so excited for this trip. She kicked off her trip by going to the San Diego Zoo on January 26th, 2013, and so far, everything was going great. But then she checks into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and this is where everything starts to go downhill. At the time, the Cecil Hotel had briefly changed its name to the Stay on Main Hotel. I can imagine that this was an attempt to rebrand. The Cecil Hotel had a really bad reputation of being unsafe, and it was a really odd layout as well. Some floors of the hotel were for visitors and tourists like Alisa, and other floors were for short and long-term accommodations for locals. The Cecil Hotel is in the Skid Row area of downtown LA, which, if you know, you know. It's an incredibly dangerous area, and some of the people who hung around that neighborhood would also stay in the Cecil Hotel. The hotel has a long history of suicides and mysterious deaths, and a lot of really high-profile serial killers have also stayed there in the past. At the time of Alisa's death, the hotel manager who was working there had been working there for 10 years, and during that 10-year period, she herself had seen 80 people die at that hotel. So overall, not a great place to stay, so I'm assuming that's why they tried renaming the hotel. If Alisa knew that, I'm not sure if she would have stayed there, but nonetheless, Alisa checked in and she was assigned room 506 up on the hotel's 5th floor. She initially shared the room with a couple of people, but she was moved after just 2 days because she was reportedly acting really strange and scaring the couple. She would leave notes for them that told them to go away or go home, and she would lock the door to the room and not let them in unless they told her the correct password. Right before Alisa disappeared, she also went to a live recording of the Conan show, and she was kicked out for disruptive behavior. This brings us to January 31st, 2013, the day she went missing. That day started off seemingly normal. The only person who saw Alisa outside of the hotel that day was a local bookstore manager who said Alisa was buying books and gifts for her family. The manager described her as being outgoing, lively, and friendly, and she was wondering if what she was buying was going to be too heavy to travel back home with. At this point, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The last time she was ever seen alive was by the hotel staff. She was wandering around the lobby and at one point yelled, quote, "I'm crazy, but so is LA." End quote. Alisa then went into a restricted part of the hotel where she was asked to leave, and then she made her way towards the hotel's elevators. She then got in and was never seen alive again. What happened after this has never fully been explained. The next day, Alisa was supposed to check out of the hotel, but she never did. And her parents weren't able to get a hold of her anymore, which was really odd because she talked to them daily ever since she left home. A few days of no contact would go by before her parents really began to worry. And so this is when she was reported missing to the police. Her parents then flew out to begin searching right away. When police arrived to the Cecil Hotel, housekeeping had already cleaned Alisa's room and bagged up all of her personal belongings. The housekeeper said that the room was pretty messy, but not in a foul play type of way. There was no sign of forced entry into the room, and although messy, nothing really seemed to ring any alarm. Investigators began searching the hotel, and they even brought in tracking dogs to roam the building, and this also included the hotel's roof. The dogs only picked up on her scent from her room to an area near a window, where the hotel's fire escape was. But other than that, nothing was found, not even up on the roof. Police couldn't legally search every guest room of the hotel unless they had probable cause that a crime was committed, which at this point they didn't suspect. But it was odd that she seemingly vanished into thin air. A couple of weeks would go by before police really upped their search. Part of this investigation was combing through several hours of security footage from the hotel, and soon they were able to spot Alisa's last moments before she disappeared. But it would really only bring more questions than answers. Investigators found security footage of Alisa on January 31st, the last day she was seen alive. It showed her in the hotel's elevator, and it's about 2.5 minutes of really unusual footage. Alisa is shown here moving her body in a really weird way. It looked like she was talking to someone either not there or out of frame, and she's then seen jumping in and out of the elevator. She pushes all of the elevator buttons, but the doors don't close, and she's constantly looking out into the hallway as if someone is following her or something. At one point, she gets out, gets back in, but the doors still won't close, so she gets out once more, walking away, never to be seen alive again. When this footage was released, it caused a media frenzy because of her strange behavior, and theories about what happened started to spread. Some said that it looked like she was running away from someone and trying to get the elevator to close, while others said it looked like something paranormal was going on. Overall, everyone kind of agreed that whatever was happening was very unsettling, and some said that it looked like she was having a psychotic episode. It was at this point that the seriousness of her mental health issues were released by her parents. It came to light just how badly she struggled with her bipolar disorder. Alisa never had any suicidal thoughts or attempts to end her own life. She was known to randomly stop taking her medication at times, and during those times she would suffer from some pretty bad hallucinations that someone was following her, and she would often hide underneath her bed. At one point in the past, she was even hospitalized for this. So once this came out, the last video footage of her seemed more like she was going through some sort of psychotic episode of some sort, although some people still believe that the footage was somehow tampered with. Fast forward almost 3 weeks later. Around this time, multiple guests of the hotel started complaining about their water being black and having a sour, unusual taste. Some were complaining about low water pressure, so on February 19th, 2013, one of the hotel's maintenance workers made his way up to the roof. On the roof sat 4 1,000-gallon water tanks. They were 4 by 8 foot cylinders propped up on concrete blocks, and they had no fixed access to the top, meaning the only way to get up and check the water at the top was to physically bring a ladder over and climb up. These water tanks provided water to not only the hotel's guest rooms, but also to the kitchen and the hotel's coffee shop. So when the maintenance worker got to the top of the first water tank, he noticed that the hatch was already open, and when he looked inside, he saw Alisa's body. She was nude, laying face up in the water. Her clothes were found sunk to the bottom of the tank, coated in what investigators said looked like sand. Her watch and room key were also in the tank, but the only thing never found was Alisa's phone. Authorities found no evidence of trauma, SA, or suicide, and by the decomposition of her body, it appeared that she'd been in the water tank the entire time that she was missing. The toxicology report found small traces of her prescription medication, along with an allergy medicine and ibuprofen in her system. But what's odd is that the level of her medication that was found in her system is lower than what it should have been. This suggests that Alisa was either undertaking her bipolar medicine or had very recently stopped taking it altogether. Since there was no immediate sign of foul play, for example, no cuts or bruises on her body, authorities said that it would have been impossible for someone to have forced her body into the water tank without injuring her. As a result, Alisa's death was inconclusive, and authorities couldn't determine her manner of death. Ultimately, though, Alisa's death was ruled as an accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder as a significant factor. We still don't technically know how Alisa got into the water tank that day. Like, nothing can really explain it. The doors and stairs to the hotel's roof are kept locked, and only employees have the keys or passwords to access it. If you tried to force the doors open, an alarm would go off. So this leaves the hotel's fire escape, which is near where her scent trailed off. She could have gone out this window onto the fire escape to bypass all of those security measures. Someone posted a video online showing how easy it would be to get to the roof via the fire escape. And in that video, 2 of the water tank lids were open. So the main question is, was the lid already open to the water tank that fateful day? Like I said, these tanks were massive, and you had to use a ladder to climb up onto them, which a ladder was not there when Alisa was found. The tanks were then protected with heavy lids. Police suspect that Alisa was going through a mental health episode that day and somehow stumbled across the water tanks on the roof. Maybe she thought they were a good place to hide since she was known to do that in the past. Somehow got in, but then couldn't get out of the small hatch. It's suspected she then tried to stay afloat for as long as possible, even taking off her clothes so that they wouldn't weigh her down. But then she just tragically drowned. This still doesn't explain how she got into the water tank in the first place though, or why none of the tracking dogs or police found Alisa when they searched the roof. A few different pathologists all had mixed opinions about whether or not her death was truly accidental, but that is the official story of what police say happened. I do think that it seems more likely that Alisa was just sadly struggling with her mental health, which ultimately is what led to her tragic death. But I will say that the last footage of her inside that elevator is truly disturbing and sinister, no matter the cause. But it's now been 13 years, and although Alisa's case is technically solved, what she experienced in her final moments remains a mystery.
Weird spooky story time. Glitch in the Matrix Reddit stories. I have the Zippo lighter, just a plain old flippy lighty. I've had it for around 17 years or so, and it just randomly disappears and then shows up somewhere completely different with no explanation. I once left it at my ex-girlfriend's house and found it under my driver's seat. She even sent me a picture of her holding it, and other random stuff like that. Most recently, it was in a random box in the back room of my dad's house while I was gone for a year for work. I found it placed on the shelf, and we both agreed and confirmed that the Zippo was in fact on that shelf, next to a picture of my grandpa. It went missing 3 weeks ago. Neither of us smoke, nor do we have any use for a lighter. Today, I was doing laundry and it was in the cabinet across the house next to my detergent. So this Zippo lighter just randomly disappears and reappears all of the time. And what's especially weird is neither of you smoke. I want to know what the story is behind the Zippo. Why do you have a Zippo if you don't smoke? So I'm looking at the comments and people are asking questions, and he says, I don't carry it. It just lives on the shelf. So it just moves around by itself. And I want to say like a poltergeist, but it's not within the house. It's like all over your dad's house, your girlfriend's house, your car. Like, what is that? One person commented, 17 years is a long time for someone to keep finding its way back to you. Maybe it's not just a lighter anymore. Yeah, this is like some talisman or something. Like, this is something that was like meant for you to have. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you guys think this is, and if you've ever had an experience like this, let me know.
This grandmother killed her two husbands 30 years apart and almost got away with it. Pauline Harris was born on March 28, 1942 in San Francisco, California. Not much is known about her early years. Colleen married her first husband, Larry, when she was very young, and they married very quickly after they met. This is kind of a pattern when it comes to Colleen. The two started a family together, but Larry was pretty much cheating on Colleen right away. I actually saw it reported that Larry cheated on Colleen with 15 separate women. When Colleen discovered her husband's affairs, she took their kids and left him. Larry tried to come win Colleen back, but she threatened him with a weapon to get out of her house, and the two quickly divorced after that. Larry is Colleen's only surviving husband, and I truly do believe that it was her first husband's betrayal and all of his affairs that made Colleen so vengeful. Colleen then met Jim Batten. The two fell for each other very hard and very fast, and it wasn't long until they were married. Jim actually seemed like a really good catch. He didn't have any children of his own, but he truly loved Colleen's kids. He also owned his own very successful business that Colleen would help him out with. But after being together for over 10 years, Jim and Colleen were fighting all of the time. It wasn't a happy marriage anymore, so in 1985, Jim asked Colleen for a divorce. And then on the night of July 31st, 1985, 43-year-old Colleen called the police and said, I shot my husband, I think. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know if I even shot him. And when the police got there, 47-year-old Jim was dead on the bedroom floor right next to their bed. And their bed was absolutely covered in blood, so it looked like Jim had been shot while he was laying on his bed, and then he was pushed onto the ground next to the bed, which is actually very important to remember later on. Colleen claimed that that night she found out that her husband was SAing her underage daughter that she had from her first marriage, or that her husband was like threatening to SA her daughter. And according to Colleen, she confronted her husband and then he threatened to shoot her. And after that, the rest was a blur. Colleen said that she kind of blacked out, and when she regained consciousness, her husband Jim was dead. So she assumed that she shot him in self-defense because right before she blacked out, she remembered feeling like she was going to die. And in this situation, the first thing you'd probably do is call the police. You'd probably be very confused and very scared. But the first thing that Colleen actually did was call her lawyer. They talked on the phone for over an hour, and then Colleen called the police. Colleen was arrested for the first-degree murder of her husband Jim, and on trial, she stuck to the same story, that he was threatening her and her underage daughter, so whatever happened was in self-defense, but that she couldn't remember anything because she blacked out. And blacking out is actually something that could have happened. Your brain in a very traumatic situation will kind of black out to protect itself. And the jury actually did believe Colleen, and she was found not guilty of murder. But even then, there were a lot of people that thought that Colleen got away with murder, that she likely killed her husband because he was going to divorce her, he was going to leave her, and with him gone, she would inherit his successful business. He also owned a lot of properties that were worth a lot of money, and he just had a lot of money in general. And after Colleen was found not guilty of her husband's murder, she went right back to living life as normal, except this time she was living off of Jim's money and also was running his business. And about 2 years after the trial ended, Colleen started dating Bob Harris. They actually met when they were teenagers and they went on a date, but nothing really happened after that. Colleen went on to have a few husbands. Bob also got married. He had 3 children and divorced. And it was at this point that Colleen and Bob reconnected 30 years after their first date as teenagers. They just bumped into each other. And within weeks of running into each other, they fell really hard for each other really, really fast, and they started dating. Bob's 3 children seemed to like Colleen at first, but his mom did not like Colleen. This is like motherly instincts because she felt like her son's new girlfriend was hiding something. Colleen had told Bob's family that her second husband died tragically from heart problems, but his mother actually did some research and found out that her son's new girlfriend was actually the one that shot and killed her husband and actually went on trial for his murder. Bob's family assumed that he didn't know anything about this, so they told him about what they found, but Bob assured his family that he knew everything, that Colleen told him that her second husband was extremely abusive and she had to kill him in self-defense. And it actually wasn't long after this that Bob and Colleen were married. And they would be together for many, many, many years. And Bob's family tried to be happy for him, but they were very skeptical and suspicious of Colleen the entire time. In 1997, Bob retired, and about 7 years later, in 2005, Colleen and Bob were both in their 60s. And Colleen also wanted to retire, but Bob told her that he didn't think that they could survive just off Social Security, and at least one of them had to keep working. And that's when Colleen, who really wanted to retire, came up with an idea. If Colleen and Bob were to get a divorce, then Colleen would go back to being a widow, technically, because her second husband died because she shot him. But if Colleen was technically a widow at her age, she would be eligible for a bunch of benefits and money. But Bob was pretty disgusted that his wife of now like 15 years was saying that she wanted to get a divorce just so she could get money, pretty much get money because she killed her husband, self-defense or not. Reluctantly, Bob still went along with this plan. They got a divorce, she got the money, and then they remarried. But even after they remarried, Bob's perception of Colleen had changed after this. He never saw her the same after she took the money from killing her husband, and he became very unhappy in the marriage. After retiring, Bob started doing a lot of conservation work in Mongolia, and by 2012, Bob was going to Mongolia to do this work all the time, more and more, because he wanted to get away from his wife. Bob is in his 70s, and it was while in Mongolia that Bob started having an affair with a 34-year-old local woman, a woman that was like less than half of his age. And when Colleen discovered the affair, she was absolutely devastated. She actually discovered that her husband was cheating while he was away in Mongolia, so she had to wait for him to return to confront him. And when she did, it was actually Bob that suggested that he move out and they get a divorce. And Colleen was oddly calm about it. Bob moved out, but about a month later, Colleen had to get a pretty serious surgery, so Bob offered to move back in and help her as she recovered from the surgery. I imagine that he felt pretty guilty, and for a while after that, they were kind of living like husband and wife again, or at least I imagine that's what Colleen thought about it. She truly thought that they would work this out and get back together. But Bob was still planning to move back out and go forward with the divorce once Colleen recovered. And then one evening on January 5th, 2013, Bob and Colleen were hanging out at home when Bob got a call, and it was actually his mistress calling him. Colleen was absolutely devastated. She thought that her and Bob were going to get back together. She didn't even know that Bob was still in contact with this woman. And then the very next day, Colleen's lawyer, the exact same lawyer that she called after shooting her husband Jim, and also the same lawyer that represented her at her murder trial, called 911, and Colleen's lawyer told the police on the line that there was a homicide at the home of Colleen and Bob.
Been a homicide.
Okay, what happened?
Yeah, I can't tell you. I'm an attorney.
When police got to the home, Colleen was acting very confused, like she had no idea what was going on. Her husband, 72-year-old Bob Harris, was lying dead on their bed, blood everywhere. It was the exact same story from 30 years earlier. Colleen's husband is found dead, shot in bed, and Colleen had no memories on how it happened. I'm sure Colleen was thinking that the defense worked once before, why not try it again? But unlike the first time this happened, there was actually evidence that Colleen was not in a mental fog after her husband Bob was shot. Actually, within 1 hour of Bob being shot dead, Colleen drove over 200 miles to a storage unit where she hid the weapon she used to shoot Bob. She also hid a very valuable coin collection that Bob owned. I don't think that she figured that the police would be able to find out that she made this road trip, but they were easily able to track her GPS. Not only did she try to hide the murder weapon in the storage unit, but Colleen also tried to hide something very valuable that Bob owned, this like really expensive coin collection. I'm assuming that she thought she would go on trial, be found not guilty again, and then she could sell these coins that Bob owned and then take that money to start over once again. And another thing that makes Colleen's "I blacked out and I don't remember anything" defense not line up this time is when Colleen was driving home from the storage unit, her car actually broke down and she had to call AAA. And this call doesn't sound like someone that's unaware of her actions and in like a blacked out mental fog.
Thank you for calling AAA. May I have your name, please?
Colleen Harris.
Yes, Miss Harris. Are you in a safe location?
I just started swerving on the freeway, and then all of a sudden I kind of did a complete flip, and then the car won't start. I'm off of Highway 80. I can see a sign ahead of me that says UC Davis, Sacramento. I live in Pleasantville, so I have no way to get home unless, I have the car.
Okay.
So, and I don't have anybody at home, so I'm just going to have to wait.
And then when Colleen finally did get home, she called her lawyer, not the police, once again. And she talked to her lawyer on the phone for over an hour and a half. And then the lawyer came over to the house, to the crime scene. And then it was her lawyer that finally called the police 10 hours after Bob was shot. Colleen was arrested for the first-degree murder of her third husband, Bob Harris, and was once again on trial for murder 30 years later. This time she tried to change her story, saying that she does remember shooting Bob, but it was an accident. She said that her husband Bob was sleeping with a weapon and she was concerned for his safety. So while he was sleeping, she tried to get it out from under him, and he woke up, saw his wife standing over him with a weapon. So he was scared. He tried to wrestle her for the weapon and it went off. And it was only after the weapon went off that Colleen blacked out, and it was then that she was in a mental fog and didn't remember anything. And once again, this story does not line up with the actual evidence. There's evidence that Bob was asleep when he was shot dead. And this is probably the exact same thing that happened to Jim, because if you remember, he was found dead on the floor, but all of the blood was in the bed. Colleen was likely upset that Bob was going to leave her, so she shot him dead while he was sleeping, just like she did with Jim when he said that he was going to divorce her. And for the murder of Bob Harris, Colleen was found guilty of murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. But at the age of 73 years old, Colleen will be behind bars for the rest of her life. And because of double jeopardy laws, Colleen will never be able to be charged again with Jim's murder. Even though I think it's really likely that she did kill both men. I mean, let me know your thoughts. I feel like a lot of you guys are going to agree with me, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. But while you're there, please remember to be respectful. This is Jim and Bob's story, and you don't know who could be in the comments. Someone that actually knew and loved Jim and Bob in real life could be in the comments, so please remember to always be respectful. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we cover this case today, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Thank God for a tip-off that stopped his plans, because this could have been horrific. I cannot believe people do not know who this man is and what he did. It's absolutely sickening. It was 2023 when 71-year-old Mark Wally from Manchester was concocting a sick plan online. He'd been casually discussing these disgusting plans online with like-minded individuals about his interest in children under the age of 12. Now, it was the National Crime Agency that ended up finding out through a tip-off that he'd not only been discussing sickening desires, but had also been sharing images with others. There is a special place in hell for people like this. He was not only sharing these images, but was planning to create his own content. Now, it was a tip-off from somebody in Norway that ended up catching him just before he managed to go ahead with the plan, and when you hear what he was going to do, it's just, please be warned. I have no words for this. He'd found some other person online who had access to a 12-week-old baby. They had arranged to meet in a hotel room and go ahead with the plan to create the content. Now, I don't know what the motivation was of the other person, whether they were just purely doing this out of sick greed for money, or whether they actually were going to enjoy this too. But when I tell you this came down to the wire. Now, police investigations are incredibly complex because they not only have to catch the bad guys, essentially, they also have to make sure there's enough evidence to get a conviction. Otherwise, they risk letting these people go. I can't imagine how they must have felt waiting in the wings to pounce on this man. They obviously had to kind of wait to prove that he was actually going to go ahead with this. Otherwise, Mark could basically just lie in court and say it was just a fantasy. So many people get away with stuff by saying, oh yeah, it was just like role play. They basically had to watch him enter the hotel in Manchester city centre. They waited and watched as Mark pressed the button to the elevator to go up to the hotel room. Suddenly, they surrounded him. They just came out of nowhere, and that must have felt so good. And thankfully, they got him arrested, and surprise, surprise, Mark tried to lie his way out of this and be like, oh no, I'm just here to meet somebody for an affair. But eventually, when he was presented with the evidence and found out how much stuff they'd got on him, basically, he admitted everything. He was backed into a corner at that point. He pleaded guilty to making and distributing child images and arranging a child S offence. And what makes me so furious is that he was actually known to police. He was already found to have had child images on his computer years earlier. So please explain to me why he's just allowed to walk free and do this. He was sentenced to 80 months behind bars, which for me is just absolutely nothing.
A young couple ends up taking the lives of 11 people, including a 2-year-old, and I will never understand why they committed these crimes. It feels like they did this for no reason. In Lincoln, Nebraska in 1957, police get a call that there was a young man that was found lying on Superior Street. He had been hit with a firearm multiple times. They found an ID on the victim and confirmed it is Robert Culver. He works at the Crest service station, and the manager stated that there was $160 stolen from the register and about $10 worth of change. People that found Robert's body was a private investigator and also a young 21-year-old airman, and they kind of were acting a little bit shady. So they brought them in for an interview, wondering what they were doing there, and the airman took a lie detector test, and he did fail it, but then he did admit what they were there for. They never explained why, but it turns out they really weren't involved with this crime. Police speak with a woman named Mrs. Kemp who owns a used clothing store, and she stated that a young teenager had came in and bought $10 worth of clothing and paid her in change. They had no idea that it's possible a teenager was committing these crimes. On January 27, 1958, 2 young men arrived at the Ballard residence, knocked on the door, and nobody answered. So they decided to go around the house, and there was kind of like an outhouse back there, and they realized there was a foul smell back there. When they opened it, they found the body of a small child and also a mother that was stuffed into the toilet. Police arrive on the scene and they find the Ballard family. They are all deceased. They found the father in the chicken coop. He had been hit with a firearm multiple times. They also found the wife. She was hit with a firearm multiple times and hit with a sharp object. They also found the body of 2-year-old Betty Jean. She had been bludgeoned to death in the head and also attacked with a sharp weapon. There was another daughter named Carol Ann who was from a previous marriage, and she was nowhere to be found. So one of the boys that found the bodies, his brother named Charles Starkweather, he is dating Carol Ann. Charlie had a tough childhood. He grew up very poor, kids picked on him in school, and he eventually became a garbage man. He's only 19 years old, and it seems like he just hated the world and everyone was afraid of him. Charlie is 19 years old, where Carol Ann is only 14, and her parents did not approve of this relationship because he was so much older. No one has seen Charlie for about a week, but when people came to Carol Ann's home, she was turning people away, even her own grandmother, stating, the family is sick, you need to leave. No one has seen either of them in a few days, and Charlie's brother tells the police he had borrowed his .22 rifle, which was the weapon used to unalive the family. So there's an APB put out on his vehicle, and also for Carol and also Charlie. They do eventually find Charlie's vehicle 20 miles outside of Lincoln that was stuck in mud near the Myers farm.
So they decided to go into the farm because they think Charlie and Carol are in there, but they are not in the home. So they go outside to the back of the property, and they do find August, who is the owner of the farm. He is deceased. He had been hit with a firearm multiple times, and he had a blanket over him. While police are at the Meyer farm, they get word that 2 teens went on a date and they never returned home, which included Carol King and Robert Jensen. So they decided to go into like a kind of a cellar that was on the barn property, and they found their bodies. They both had been hit with a firearm multiple times, and Carol, she had been SA'd with a sharp weapon. So police set up checkpoints all along the state trying to find the Jensen's vehicle, but there is no sign of Charlie or Carol. And then they eventually get word that there was 3 more victims that they found. The victims included C. Lawyer Ward. He was hit with a firearm multiple times, and then his wife Clara. She was found upstairs tied up, and she had been hit with a sharp object in the chest and in the head. The other victim was their maid Lillian. She was also found tied up and also hit with a sharp weapon. Jensen's vehicle was found on the Ward's property, and now they are really wondering, is it possible that Carol is not really a hostage, but she is an accomplice? Because how was Charlie able to subdue and tie up both women, keep an eye on one and then also tie up another? So they believe that Carol is involved. So this story was put out everywhere. They even had to close schools and bring out the National Guard because people were terrified because Charlie is armed and dangerous. 500 miles west of Lincoln in Wyoming, there was a sheriff that was on patrol when he noticed that there was an altercation off the side of the road. There was 2 men fighting over a firearm, and he noticed that there was a person in the driver's seat slumped over. And eventually he ran out and stated, "Hey, stop." And he sees Carol Ann. She's running up to him stating, "I've been kidnapped. Charlie has unalived 10 people, and I saw everything." So Charlie ends up taken off down the road, and there's a police chase after him. But the victim that was in the vehicle is 37-year-old Merrill Collins. Police are in pursuit, and they're in a car chase. And eventually they just start taking their firearms and firing at Charlie. And eventually he does get hit and stops the vehicle. So they, pull over and they say, "Get out of the vehicle and get on the ground." So he calmly gets out, gets on the ground, and, surrenders. And he is just so calm and has no remorse for what he did. So they're interviewing Charlie, and he confesses to everything, but at first he states Carol Ann is not involved. So first we start with Robert, stating that he needed money for rent, so that's when he took the firearm and lured Robert into the vehicle, drove him out somewhere, and then just took his life and stole the money. They're not quite sure why he just didn't alive him at the service station. So then Charlie went to talk to Carol Ann's parents and, said, "I love your daughter. I want to be with her." But they stated, "No, you're too old for her, and we don't think you're good enough for her." They were afraid he was going to get her pregnant. So there was an altercation, and he got upset, and he ended up taking Carol Ann's parents' lives. And they're asking, "Why did you unalive her 2-year-old sister? She did not do anything." And he stated she just wouldn't stop crying, so he just bludgeoned her to death in the head. So Carol comes home, and Charlie tells her, "I've got your family hostage, but if you do what I say, I will let them go and I will not hurt them." But she has no idea that he's already taken the lives of her entire family. So she does what he says and, cooperates. That's when they took the vehicle, and then they got stuck near the Myers farm. And he did see August outside of the farm, and he had a firearm. He does know him because he's done some hunting on his property. But when he saw that firearm, he figured he maybe heard the radio and realized they're out to get him. So he had to take his life because he was afraid he was going to come after him. So he realizes he needs to get a new vehicle, and that's when he comes into the 2 teens, Carol and Robert. So they agree, stating that he needs a ride. He gets into the vehicle with them, but then he takes a firearm and puts it up against Robert's head. Eventually he lures them out and then takes their lives. And they're asking, "Well, what about Carol? She was brutally SA'd with a sharp weapon," and he had no idea what they were talking about. Charlie needed a getaway car, and he made his way to the Ward residence. I believe he knew them. I believe he knew that they were wealthy. So he made the 2 women, Clara and Lillian, make him breakfast, then tied them up upstairs and waited for a lawyer to get home. When he arrived, he said everything was going to be fine. I wasn't going to hurt him, but he started to run. So that's when he fired that firearm at him and hit him in the back. And then he stated, "Well, what about the 2 women you attacked with the sharp weapon?" And he's like, "I left them tied up. I never hurt them in any way. They were alive." So he was surprised that they were deceased. Charlie admitted to 11 homicides, and the last one being Merrill. He wanted to switch vehicles with him, and when he refused, he ended up taking his life. They ended up asking Charlie, "Why did you do all of this? Why did you take all of these people's lives?" And he just stated, "I just kind of wanted to be an outlaw, and that was the only reason." He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to death in 1959 by the electric chair.
The police do believe that Carol Ann was involved because she had plenty of times to go to the police and escape and get help, and she refused to. Now, Charlie claims she's an accessory even to her own family's unaliving, and he did not force her to do anything. Charlie does agree to testify at Carol Ann's trial and claims that she was an accessory. So with the two teens that included the other Carol, he had no idea that she had been brutally attacked in the genitals with a sharp weapon. And it was Carol that had done that because she was so jealous because she thought Charlie was having some relations with her or something like that. Carol Ann was also jealous of Clara and also Lillian, thinking that Charlie had SA'd them. So she was the one that brutally took their lives with that sharp weapon. Carol Ann was found guilty and she was sentenced to life in prison, but she was paroled after only serving 18 years. And she is still alive to this day. I believe she's about 81 or 82 years old. But she claims that she is completely innocent and she was a hostage, not an accessory. So let me know in the comments below, do you believe Carol Ann is a willing accomplice? Was she coerced into doing some of these actions because she was afraid of Charlie, or was she truly a hostage? Now, I believe, in my opinion, she got a thrill out of doing this. She had plenty of times to go to the police. She was even at her home while Charlie's cleaning up the crime scene where her parents and her young sister were brutally unalived. She was just watching TV while he cleaned up the crime scene, and she was telling anybody that came to the house to just go away. She got a thrill out of doing this, and then she brutally took the lives of Lillian and Clara, and then brutally SA'd Carol King with a sharp weapon because she was jealous because she thought her boyfriend was having relations with these women. It's absolutely disgusting. She deserved to be locked up for life. I didn't care if she was 14 years old. They tried her as an adult. She only served 18 years and got to live the rest of her life. It just disgusts me because these victims were innocent and did nothing wrong. It was all for nothing. So let me know what you guys thought of this in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one. And please take care of yourselves.
You've heard of the Charlie game, right? Well, if you haven't, it's like Bloody Mary, but way, way worse. With Bloody Mary, you turn off all the lights, you turn the water on or something, and then you say Bloody Mary's name 3 times. Then your friend would grab you, you'd run out of the bathroom screaming, and it was all fun and games because you got scared, right? It's scary, but it's okay because we all know it's a game, right? But what about when it's not just a game? I can't believe I'm doing this makeup look, but you guys asked for this. You guys wanted visual distract, so here it is. Anyways, me and my friends were hanging out in the basement. We were eating pizza and playing the Nintendo Switch. Then Jonah looked to me and asked, "Do you know the Charlie game?" At first I thought he was talking about a new game on the Switch or something. He told me you go into the bathroom and you turn off the lights. Then you knock on the mirror and you look for Charlie. If you see him, the game is over. If you don't see him, then it's time to go to step 2. The second part of the game was too hard to explain, so we decided he was just going to show us. He took a piece of paper and he wrote yes and no on it in 4 corners, like this. Then he put 2 pencils crossing each other on the paper and started chanting, "Charlie, Charlie, can you hear me?" He turns the light off, and at this point I'm starting to get scared. I whispered to my friend Christina that I was scared. She leaned over and assured me that it's just a game. We were whispering, but somehow Jonah heard me. Jonah looks up at us and he goes, "It's not just a game." We asked Charlie questions and the pencils moved and he answered. But that's not the scary part. So after we finished the game, we went to bed. Everyone else had fallen asleep and I was watching TikTok on my phone. I heard a creak and it sounded like it was coming from upstairs. I tried to tell myself maybe it was the wind or the house settling or their pets, but it wasn't windy and they don't have any pets. So when I heard the creak a second time, I got scared. I tried to wake Christina, but she was out. That's when I noticed that Jonah wasn't laying next to us. I'm debating whether or not to get up when I start hearing whispering. And then it hits me, he's playing that freaking game again. That's when I had an idea. I was gonna scare him. So I sneaked closer to the bathroom and sure enough, the whispers are getting louder. I could hear his chanting, "Charlie, Charlie, can you hear me? Charlie, Charlie, show your face." When I got up to the door, it was closed. There was a weird light coming from underneath the door. I reached for the door handle and when I touched it, it was burning hot. I kept reminding myself that it was just a game. I knew when I opened that door, I was gonna see Charlie. I just went for it. I opened the door. And we're finished with Bedazzled Shrek, so go to part 2. Let me know what look I should do for part 2.
This guy looks like a roided out marshmallow, and he's probably a serial killer too. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Maine South woodsman. Viewer discretion is advised. This case takes us to Massachusetts, primarily in the Worcester area. The start of this case is in 1996. A 39-year-old sex worker named Teresa K. Stone was found murdered in the area of Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Around that same time, a construction worker named Alex Cesny had been picked up on charges of rape and assault, unrelated to Teresa K. Stone's case at that point. He had beat another sex worker, he had strangled another sex worker. Most of those charges never stuck because the victims in question who survived never showed up to court. He was convicted of some lesser charges related to these cases and only got a very brief time in prison. In 2002, he is back in trouble once again for the rape and strangulation of another woman. The victim survived, and he was arrested and charged with everything. However, the victim ends up dying. And when she died, the police actually had to end up dropping all charges against him because the only evidence they had against him was her testimony. And then in 2002, a reign of terror began. A killer would strike several sex workers, and he would be nicknamed the Maine South Woodsman. This is the name of the neighborhood where most of this occurred in the area of Worcester. 29-year-old mother Carmen Rudy, who was working as a sex worker as well, would disappear on September 30th, 2002. He had been in and out of drug rehab centers. Body was found almost exactly a year later on September 29th, 2003. When they found her skeletonized remains in this area, just a few feet away, they found other skeletal remains. She was later identified as 29-year-old Betseda Montalvo. She vanished in April of 2003. She was also a mother. She had 3 kids and was also working as a sex worker. On March 3rd, 2004, the body of another woman was found. This is actually a little over a mile away from where the other 2 women were found. She would soon be identified as 33-year-old Denelia Torres. She disappeared sometime around mid-2003. She also lived kind of a rough life. She had battled again with drug and alcohol addiction, and she did some work as a sex worker. Another potential victim was 42-year-old Wendy Morello. She disappeared in September of 2004 after leaving her home and never returning. She had the same, drug and alcohol issues as the previous victims and had a history of sex work. But her body was found all the way in Maine. This is like 100 miles or so away from where the other victims were found. But she was last seen in Worcester, Massachusetts. Judging by where her body was found, that made investigators think that she may not be related to the other victims. September 4th, 2007, the body of another woman was found. A 5-year-old Lenaida Oliveria. She also kind of had a similar lifestyle to the other victims. And they haven't released all the information, but it sounds like her murder, which she was found about 12 miles or so away from Worcester, they had evidence to show that the person that killed her was someone she knew on a personal level. Could that be an acquaintance or a lover or a family member? It didn't seem to line up all the way with the other victims. So it was more of like a proximity thing that initially they thought maybe she is one of the victims. You have 5 women who all did sex work to some degree, who all had drug and alcohol addiction, who all vanished from pretty much the same area. 4 of the victims were found in relatively close proximity to one another. One of them was found in a different state. Profiler would come up with a profile for who may have likely been their killer. They are fairly confident that 3 of the victims, Carmen Rudy, Betseda Montalvo, and Denelia Torres, were done by the same person. The profiler said probably came from a blue-collar job, likely worked in construction, probably liked to do a lot of outdoor stuff like camping, hiking, fishing, and was someone who would frequently utilize sex workers, which brought them back to a familiar person, this guy here, Alex Cesny. In 2008, he was finally charged with the rape and murder of Teresa K. Stone. He goes to trial, he is found guilty of her murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. And so he has long been suspected of being the Maine South Woodsman. Killer of 3 women for sure, and possibly up to 5, outside the ones he's already been convicted of. He would question this overgrown mushroom about those murders, but he always denied responsibility. Again, he is widely suspected to be their killer. Everything about his MO fits with all of those victims. But sadly, they had no physical evidence to connect him to those murders. And to this date, he's only ever been convicted of one homicide. And another issue that many people have, understandably, is how hard are they working to get evidence to convict him or charge him or anyone with the murders of these women. They're sex workers, right? They had drug and alcohol issues. You tend to get this feeling of, well, who really cares? That's how people kind of look at police who are investigating cases like this. And it's not really worth all the extra work. Well, it is, though, because these are full human beings. Their lifestyle does not mean that it's acceptable to kill them. It's certainly not acceptable to let their killer get away. I just hope that they are still somehow trying to take this seriously. Hopefully their killer is behind bars, but he may not be. There may be multiple killers in this, and they all deserve justice. Someone somewhere out there might have the information to help capture their killer. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murders of these women, please call 508-799-8466. He was smiling as he was being executed because that's normal. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of David Ballard. Viewer discretion is advised. Sadly, I don't have a photo of the victim. I've been searching through newspaper clippings and everything, but I just cannot find one. This case occurred in 1977 on the Vegas Strip. On December 20th, 1977, a man would enter the Morocco Motel and Casino armed with a gun. He was holding a .38 caliber revolver in his hand. He put that gun into the face of a female cashier and said, "Give me all the money." When this happened, there were two other individuals who saw it happening and thought to themselves, we need to take care of this. An employee of the casino named Larry Thompson tried to stop the gunman. The gunman then turned around and shot Mr. Thompson in his stomach. Then another man, just a customer of the casino, tried to intervene as well. The gunman pointed a gun at him and shot him too. David Ballard was shot once through his back. The assailant stole $238 in cash and fled the scene. David Allen Ballard was born on July 2nd, 1955. He and his fiancée, Catherine, were on the Vegas Strip that night because they were getting married. They were just visiting from Baltimore, Maryland. The two of them did tie the knot. And then 2 hours later, David is shot through his back trying to stop a gunman. 10 days later, on December 30th, 1977, David Ballard died from his gunshot wounds. The now murderer was known as Jesse Walter Bishop. He fled the scene in his green vehicle, which they later found abandoned. The day after the robbery and shooting, he robbed another location. He then steals another car to get away from this robbery, and then he ends up carjacking somebody else to steal another car. He would take people hostage and force them at gunpoint to drive. Then he abandons them, he lets them live, and he steals a UPS truck, and he tries to flee. They finally caught up to him in Boulder City, Nevada, where they cornered him and they arrested him. One of the guns he had on him was a .38 caliber revolver. Testing the ammunition, they confirmed it was a match to the now murder at the Morocco Casino. Although when Jesse Bishop was arrested, it was just 2 days after the shooting, and David Ballard had not died yet. So he was initially charged with lesser charges like attempted murder, but also robbery, grand theft auto, a list of things. But when Mr. Ballard died, they then upped it to murder, first-degree murder. And he admitted that he killed David Ballard. He didn't seem to care. Like, he seemed very nonchalant about all of it. And he would be convicted of David Ballard's murder along with all the other charges against him, and he was sentenced to death. Jesse Bishop says, I'm not even going to appeal it. Let's just do it. It got to a point where he was actually concerned that his execution wasn't going to happen. So at this time, I'm not sure if it's in multiple states or not, but in Nevada, you have to automatically appeal a death sentence. It's nothing that the defendant could necessarily choose. But he did try to fire his attorneys who were filing those appeals. He wanted to be executed. On October 22nd, 1979, this is just 2 years after the murder, which nowadays is unheard of. Now people are on death row for decades. Jesse Walter Bishop's final meal was filet mignon, a tossed salad with Thousand Island dressing, asparagus, ooh, your pee is gonna smell in hell, a baked potato with sour cream, and an unspecified dessert. A little after midnight, he was strapped into a chair in the gas chamber. He would end up being the last person ever executed in Nevada in the gas chamber. And then he smiled from ear to ear. His final words would consist of calling his victim, David Ballard, a fool who got into something that was not his business and he died for it. He had no remorse. He even said, I've killed other people and I probably would have killed more. Even the victim's family members, some of them didn't even want him to be executed. They wanted him just to get life in prison. But he returns that by smiling at them, laughing at them, and saying, your loved one was an idiot for getting shot by me. Fuck this guy. And it didn't even stop there. When the gas started coming in, he was purposefully taking giant gasps of air while smiling to inhale the gas faster. It was like he was rubbing it in everyone's faces. At 12:21 a.m., he was pronounced deceased. Normally, I would say sarcastically, enjoy your time in hell, but for him, I think he genuinely is enjoying his time in hell. It took 37 years to capture a woman's killer, and it turns out the answer was always close to home. Hello, true crimer-ers. This is the case of Barbara Via Royale. Viewer discretion is advised. She was born Barbara Faye Carr in Indiana in 1958. She had 3 sisters and a brother, and at the time this case occurred, Barbara was 27 years old, and she was living in Garland, Texas with her husband. Her husband was 32-year-old Domingo Diaz Via Royale, and they lived here in this home in Garland. It was November 7th, 1986, when a neighbor to the Via Royales would call 911. Domingo would go to the next door neighbor and say, please call the police. My wife, I think she's dead. When police arrive at the home, they do in fact find Barbara has been stabbed to death. There does not appear to be any forced entry into the home. Nothing seems to have been stolen. Barbara was not raped, but they had a very obvious first suspect. Her husband, Domingo, because, he was the one who discovered her body, and then he went next door to tell someone to call the police. Which, by the way, side note, that kind of thing happens all the time. It doesn't always mean a person's guilty because they don't use their phone to call the police. It's just one of those weird psychological reactions that people have. So they interviewed Domingo pretty thoroughly, and they looked into everything about him. They also tried to match any physical evidence they may have had from the crime scene to him, but also he lived in the house. This was his home. His fingerprints are going to be everywhere. However, the police, through their methods, did determine that Domingo did not kill his wife. They cleared him back in 1986. From what I understand, 2 years later, he's now living in Mexico. He gets involved in some kind of shootout where he ends up taking a bullet and dying. Barbara's case goes cold. I mean, there's very little evidence. They don't know why this happened. They don't know who did it. They don't know if the person was invited in or if the door was just unlocked and they walked in. They don't know if there was an intention to rob her or possibly rape her, but something happened where they killed her and then they fled the scene. They have no idea. And as a matter of fact, it would not be known for 37 more years. Police were doing a lot of investigating, and they were looking into anything or anyone connected to Barbara. Well, they found out that Barbara's husband, Domingo, well, his last name wasn't actually Via Royale. His last name was actually Canales. They did have samples of DNA from him, and by 2022, 2023 or so, they're able to confirm that the DNA left behind at the crime scene that the police have stated could have only come from her killer was not her husband's DNA. But there was something about it that may have been family. And so that's when they do genetic genealogy, and they discovered that Barbara's killer was related to Domingo. And that leads them to a man named Liborio Canales, the brother of Domingo, the brother-in-law of Barbara. When this revelation came to be, he is now 85 years old. He was living in Mexico. However, when this breakthrough occurred, he had traveled to New Mexico here in the States, and they were able to track him down and arrest him. By 2024, now 86 years old, he will end up taking a plea deal. He confesses to the murder of Barbara. So on the night in question, Barbara and her husband, Domingo, went out to dinner, and this is all according to Domingo. The two of them then came back to the house, and it turns out they were not alone. And then the next gap of time, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Liborio ends up killing his sister-in-law because of a dispute in the family, is all he really said. The murder stemmed from, allegedly, according to him, an argument. But Domingo said he came back into the house after he heard screaming, and he discovered his wife dead. Well, obviously now in 2024, they know Domingo is dead now. There's nothing they can do about that. So the deal that Liborio ends up taking is a 20-year prison sentence. And I know people are going to think, wow, that's it, 20 years? Keep in mind, he's 86 years old when this is all happening. This is a life sentence for him. Just because it doesn't say life in prison doesn't mean that it isn't life in prison. He is going to die in a prison cell. My only question here, and I don't have the answer for it, is did Domingo know his brother killed his wife? Was he there when it happened? Did he cover for his brother? Or did he genuinely not know that his brother had killed his wife? I find it hard to believe that he didn't, but I don't know. Could he have also been involved directly and just didn't leave behind any of his DNA? Possibly, I don't know. But Domingo is dead regardless, so if he was involved, he died very soon after her murder. And the person who they know actually stabbed her will die in prison. So, Barbara got her justice. When I was about the age of 10 years old, I used to share a bedroom with my sister. She got super annoyed, and my mum and dad had to move me to another bedroom. I was happy in that bedroom, but then I suddenly had this fear because I felt like there was something watching me. The bedroom that I was moved to was closer to the kitchen. You could literally open my bedroom door and you see the kitchen. Anyway, one night, this was around about 1 a.m, I was woken up to this whispering sounds, and it was coming from the kitchen. So I opened the door, my bedroom door, slightly. What I saw was chilling. Tell me why. Not just one, not just two, not just three, but I saw several ghost figures sitting under our kitchen table. I was shocked. Then I looked up. What did I see? I hear a voice. That voice sounded familiar. It was like my mum's voice. And I looked at the mirror. What I saw in that reflection was this old-looking lady who stared right back at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs because I was scared. You can imagine at the age of 10 years old having to see this. My mum and dad rushed downstairs to my bedroom. I told them everything, but these figures disappeared. They told me that maybe I just had imaginary friends. I didn't know what they were talking about, but what I saw definitely were ghosts. Up to date, I'm still freaked out by it.